The valley lay before the eyes like a slumbering giant, silent yet alive with the weight of countless ages. Mist clung to its riverbanks in early morning, curling around jagged rocks and the roots of ancient trees, as if the land itself exhaled a slow, deliberate breath. Every hill and hollow seemed to hold a secret, a story long since buried under layers of soil, leaves, and time. The river that cut through the valley wound like a silver thread, its waters glinting faintly under the rising sun, whispering of journeys from the distant mountains to the endless plains beyond. In its reflection, one could see not only the present but traces of a past that no eye had witnessed, no voice had described. Here, the land felt eternal, patient, and indifferent, yet in its quiet, it held a tension that demanded attention. The air carried scents both familiar and strange, the damp richness of moss, the sweet decay of fallen leaves, and the faint tang of iron from the soil itself. The wind moved through the valley in measured, almost knowing strokes, rustling the grass and bending the branches of trees older than any human memory. It seemed to speak a language of subtle warnings, its breath touching the skin like the soft caress of a phantom hand. Even without people, the valley vibrated with anticipation, as if it remembered every footfall, every scream, every whisper that had ever touched its soil. In the distance, the mountains formed a jagged rim against the sky, protective yet menacing, and beyond them, one could imagine the unknown lands from which both humans and animals might arrive, drawn by curiosity, hunger, or desperation. In this place, time did not flow as it does in towns or cities. Seconds and hours were measured less by clocks than by the rise and fall of sunlight, the migration of birds, the swelling and retreating of rivers. Stones in the riverbed, smoothed by centuries of water, seemed to hold echoes of steps that had crossed them long ago. Trees, their trunks scarred and twisted by storms, bore witness to centuries of survival and decay. The valley, though seemingly passive, held its own stories, told in the language of shapes, patterns, and silent observation. One could almost hear the land remembering, the footprints of animals pressed faintly into mud, the charred remains of a fire, the outlines of structures now reclaimed by undergrowth. Every element of the valley suggested that this was a stage for something greater than any single life, a theater in which generations would arrive, struggle, and vanish. Yet despite its calm, the valley seemed alive with tension. Shadows lengthened as the sun climbed higher, stretching across rocky ridges and dipping into hidden hollows. Birds flew low, their calls sharp and intermittent, as if warning unseen observers of something approaching. The river, serene from a distance, betrayed hints of turbulence beneath the surface, where rocks and currents conspired to create sudden eddies and hidden depths. Even the wind, gentle as it might appear, carried a sharpness that hinted at the valley's readiness to respond, to assert itself against intrusion. Every element of this landscape, the trees, the rocks, the water, even the air, was part of a subtle choreography, a system of checks and balances that had existed long before humans arrived, and that would continue long after they were gone. It was in this delicate interplay of stillness and latent energy that the first humans would find themselves. Though their eyes would see beauty, their instincts would feel danger, though they would discover abundance, they would also encounter scarcity. Every decision made here would carry consequences, echoing not only through their own lives but through the lives of countless generations that would follow. The valley demanded respect, demanded attentiveness, and those who disregarded its unspoken rules often paid a heavy price. Even now, standing on the edge of the riverbank and gazing at the green expanse, one could almost sense the invisible eyes of the land, observing, judging, and cataloguing every movement, every breath, every choice. The valley was also a place of contradictions. It was nurturing yet merciless, serene yet full of subtle menace. Wildflowers bloomed in fragile clusters, exhaling color and scent into the morning air, while thorns and briars hid beneath their beauty, ready to tear flesh or snag clothing. Deer grazed cautiously along the edges of the forest, alert to predators invisible to the human eye, and the river teemed with fish whose movements created ripples that glittered like silver coins scattered across liquid silk. Rocks protruded from the earth in jagged formations, standing like silent sentinels, watching over the valley as if marking boundaries invisible to those who passed through. Every element reinforced the sense that this was a land that demanded understanding, that would reward knowledge but punish ignorance without mercy or hesitation. Even the light seemed different here, filtered through layers of mist and leaves, bouncing off the river and illuminating particles of dust that danced in the air. Shadows shifted with subtle grace, creating illusions that could confuse even the most attentive observer. The valley, in its complexity, felt like a living organism, breathing, adapting, and communicating in ways humans could sense but never fully comprehend. The hills themselves were alive with memory, each curve and ridge holding fragments of events long forgotten but not erased. It was as if the valley itself were a storyteller, whispering faintly to those willing to listen, offering glimpses of history not recorded in any language, but written in the language of existence itself. And so, as the sun rose higher and the valley stirred from its morning quiet, one could feel the weight of anticipation pressing gently upon the landscape. This was a place that would witness joy and sorrow, survival and destruction, unity and betrayal. Every stone, tree, and river bend would be touched by the presence of those who dared to call this valley home, and every choice they made would ripple outward, shaping the land and themselves. In the hush of dawn, it was clear, the valley remembered, and it waited patiently for the next chapter to unfold, for the next story to be etched into its enduring memory. Here, in the Whispering Valley, history had already begun, even before the first human foot touched its soil. Before any human foot touched the valley's soft soil, the land existed in a rhythm entirely its own. The hills rolled in gentle curves, dotted with wildflowers whose colors shifted subtly with the seasons. Streams ran clear and cold, carving channels into the earth that would, centuries later, guide the paths of humans. Birds filled the air with song, each call a thread in the valley's invisible tapestry of communication. The forest, dense and layered, swayed with a quiet pulse, branches brushing one another as if speaking in a language no human could ever fully understand. This was a place alive with patterns of life, intricate and self-sustaining, where predator and prey danced their eternal dance, and nothing existed outside the careful balance of survival. The valley's rivers were lifelines, their waters nourishing both flora and fauna. Schools of fish darted beneath the surface, silver flashes that shimmered like living stars in the early light. Frogs croaked from hidden pools, and insects hummed a constant undertone that seemed to thread the various sounds together. The soil, dark and rich, bore the scent of minerals and decay, the smell of centuries of fallen leaves and animal tracks pressed into the earth. Every footprint left by a passing deer or wolf slowly vanished, absorbed into the constant flow of life. Here, time did not move in hours or days but in generations of growth, in the cycles of birth, hunger, and death that shaped every living thing. Large predators prowled the shadows with quiet certainty. Wolves moved in packs, sleek and purposeful, their eyes reflecting the sun in sharp glints of amber. Bears ambled through the forests, careful and deliberate, their heavy paws leaving deep impressions in soft soil and moss. Occasionally, a mountain cat might be glimpsed in the underbrush, its spotted coat blending perfectly with dappled light, a ghostly presence that reminded the valley of the constant tension between life and survival. No corner of the land was truly safe, yet this danger created harmony. The hunters and the hunted maintained a delicate balance, each shaping the existence of the other, teaching the valley how life could flourish under the pressure of necessity. Seasons shifted with dramatic clarity, leaving the valley transformed with each passing year. In spring, rivers swelled with melted snow, and the land exhaled life in every direction. Flowers blossomed along every ridge and bank, and young animals took their first uncertain steps beneath the protective gaze of their parents. Summer brought heat and abundance, grasses and berries growing thick, attracting grazers from the hills and forests. Autumn cooled the air and painted the valley in a palette of burnt oranges, reds, and golds, signaling the preparations of creatures for the harsh months ahead. Winter cloaked the land in frost and snow, turning rivers into frozen arteries and forcing all living things to adapt or perish. Each season added layers to the valley's memory, embedding survival strategies into the consciousness of every animal and plant. The valley was also a symphony of smell and sound. The musk of animals marked territory, the sweet scent of flowers beckoned pollinators, and the air itself carried the freshness of dew and the tang of mineral-rich rocks. Streams babbled and gurgled over stones smoothed by centuries, providing music that the wind carried across meadows and forests. Trees creaked as their branches swayed, releasing clouds of leaves into the currents of air. The chorus of life was constant, yet never chaotic, a delicate order that humans would one day attempt to join, often clumsily, disrupting the patterns that had endured for millennia. The valley's cliffs and rocky outcrops told their own stories, etched over thousands of years by wind and water. Stones jutted upward, their edges sharp, and their surfaces carved with channels where water had once rushed. Some rocks bore the scars of lightning strikes or the gnawing of animals seeking minerals, while others held tiny pools that mirrored the sky and became sanctuaries for insects and amphibians alike. From these heights, the valley spread out in an unbroken mosaic of green, gold, and silver. To a human, these cliffs would eventually offer shelter and vantage points, but for now, they were untouched witnesses to the ebb and flow of nature, silently recording events in the language of erosion and growth. Even the smallest creatures played their role in the valley's vast ecosystem. Beetles scuttled across fallen leaves, consuming decay and fertilizing the soil. Birds nested in hidden crevices, feeding on insects and seeds while warning each other of predators with subtle calls. Wolves marked territory not merely to hunt but to define boundaries, a practice that would foreshadow the complex human systems of land ownership and conflict. Every movement, every interaction, contributed to the invisible web of life, demonstrating that the valley's power did not lie in any single entity but in the sum of all its parts. In this pre-human era, the valley existed without the weight of history or memory imposed by humans. It was a world governed by instinct, necessity, and the relentless cycle of life and death. Yet even in its simplicity, it was sophisticated beyond comprehension. The rivers, the forests, the hills, and the animals all communicated through actions, signals, and behaviors refined over countless generations. Life thrived in a way that was unobserved but deeply meaningful, each species finding its place in a choreography older than any human thought. As dawn slowly gave way to morning, the valley shimmered with light and life. The river sparkled, birds called to one another in complex melodies, and deer moved cautiously through shaded clearings. It was a place of beauty and danger, serenity and anticipation. And though humans had yet to set foot here, the valley seemed already to hum with the potential for change, as if it knew that one day, these patterns of life would be disrupted. The stage was set for the arrival of those who would bring fire, tools, language, and conflict, the first humans, whose presence would forever alter the delicate balance of this primordial world. Here, in the silence before the first spear, the valley held a secret promise, that life would continue, endure, and adapt, no matter the challenges to come. Every river bend, every ridge, and every forest glade contained the memory of centuries past and the anticipation of centuries yet to come. And in this quiet, unspoiled landscape, the valley waited patiently for the stories it would one day witness, knowing that its history, though unrecorded by human hands, was already being written in the language of survival, instinct, and the relentless pulse of life itself. The valley that had long thrived without human presence began to feel a new kind of movement. It was subtle at first, a shadow slipping through the forest, a distant rustle that hinted at curiosity and intelligence. The first humans arrived not as conquerors, but as observers, drawn by the abundance of water, game, and fertile soil. The valley's rivers, winding like silver threads through the hills, offered fish that glimmered beneath the sun and plants that could be gathered without the need for tools. Every step into this land was both a discovery and a gamble. The newcomers had to learn the rhythms of the valley or risk becoming its prey. The air seemed to shift around them, carrying the scents of animals, plants, and earth, a perfume both enticing and cautionary. These first settlers were few, their numbers small enough to move silently and avoid drawing the attention of larger predators. Yet their presence already began to alter the valley's balance. Birds scattered from trees as feet pressed through underbrush, and small mammals retreated into hidden burrows. The humans observed everything with a keen awareness born of necessity: which plants were edible, which roots provided sustenance, which rivers could be trusted for drinking, and which cliffs offered vantage points over the land. They listened for the subtle signals of the environment: cracks of twigs, rustling leaves, the cries of distant predators. Survival demanded attentiveness, patience, and an intuitive understanding of a world that had existed for millennia without their interference. Fire, the most transformative tool they carried, was used sparingly at first. The flickering flames provided warmth and protection, their light creating a small radius of human dominance amidst the vastness of the wilderness. Around these fires, the valley felt temporarily tamed, the darkness beyond the glow threatening yet containing life's endless possibilities. Smoke drifted into the sky, mingling with the mist that hung low over the rivers, signaling the presence of intelligence to distant observers, perhaps other humans, perhaps predators. The first sparks of civilization were not grand or imposing, they were small, practical, and fragile, yet they represented a profound shift in the valley's history. Shelters emerged slowly, built from fallen branches, leaves, and stones, mimicking natural forms yet shaped by human intention. These structures were temporary and humble, designed to protect from rain, cold, and prowling beasts, yet they symbolized more than survival. They were the first claim of ownership, the first assertion that humans could exist in harmony with the land without succumbing to it. Children learned to follow, to watch, to imitate the adults, and in doing so, became the inheritors of knowledge that would be crucial for their survival. Each day brought lessons in patience, observation, and adaptation, as the valley taught the newcomers that it was as dangerous as it was generous. Hunting became the first collective activity that required coordination, strategy, and communication. The valley's herds were plentiful, but swift and cautious, and no single hunter could take advantage of them alone. Groups formed instinctively, a pattern that would evolve into more organized social structures. Spears, sharpened stones, and traps were tested and refined, each tool a negotiation with the demands of the environment. Success meant nourishment, failure meant hunger, exposure, or worse. The valley was a classroom, and every interaction with its creatures and landscapes was a lesson in survival, adaptation, and the limits of human ingenuity. The riverbanks, fertile and abundant, became gathering spaces for plants, nuts, and roots. Humans discovered the subtle signs of ripeness: the glint of berries under sunlight, the texture of tubers beneath the soil, the scent of grains ready for harvest. Observing and mimicking the animals that had lived here for generations, they learned which plants were safe, which were poisonous, and which could be combined for sustenance. Over time, these discoveries created a growing confidence, a realization that they were capable not just of surviving, but of shaping their environment to meet their needs. This was the first step toward permanent settlement, toward the transformation of the valley from wilderness into a place marked by human presence. Yet for all the promise, danger remained omnipresent. Predators watched from the forest edges, and rival human groups, if encountered, posed an unpredictable threat. Disease, hunger, and harsh weather were constant reminders of mortality. Even in moments of abundance, the settlers moved with caution, aware that a single misstep could undo weeks of effort. The valley's lessons were harsh, demanding respect, humility, and vigilance. Life here required a delicate balance between courage and caution, ambition and patience. As the first seasons passed, humans began to leave subtle marks on the landscape, footprints pressed into mud that would dry and crack, small clearings where fire had been set, and simple structures that offered protection from the elements. These signs were quiet, almost imperceptible, yet they represented a profound shift. The valley was no longer untouched wilderness. Humans were now part of its ecosystem, not merely as consumers, but as agents of change whose presence would ripple through the land for centuries. The valley adapted to their presence as much as they adapted to it, a subtle negotiation of survival and influence. The fires burned each night, their glow a small defiance against darkness, a fragile assertion that humans could endure. Shadows danced on the surrounding trees, flickering with the movement of life, both human and animal. Stories and lessons were shared around these flames, passing knowledge from one generation to the next, embedding the first seeds of culture in the valley's soil. Through observation, imitation, and shared experience, humans slowly became attuned to the valley's rhythm. They learned its warnings, respected its abundance, and discovered that coexistence demanded both cunning and reverence. By the end of these first years, the valley had begun to feel the subtle weight of human presence. Trails formed between rivers and clearings, animals shifted their grazing patterns, and the forest itself seemed to respond to the quiet intrusion of intelligence. These first settlers had not yet claimed dominance, but they had begun to leave their mark. The fires, the shelters, the careful hunts, and the whispered conversations by the river were the first chapters in a story that would span centuries. Here, in this rich and watchful valley, the first humans were learning what it meant to belong, and what it meant to fight for survival in a land that had always belonged to no one. As the first fires burned and shelters took shape, the small human groups began to form bonds that would define the future of the valley. What had begun as survival-driven cooperation slowly transformed into something more complex, a sense of identity, belonging, and shared purpose. Families, once loosely connected by necessity, now recognized the strength in unity, establishing roles, responsibilities, and rules that would guide interactions. From these simple arrangements emerged the earliest seeds of tribal organization, the invisible structures that would later dictate alliances, rivalries, and the unfolding drama of generations. The valley, once indifferent to life, now hosted a new type of presence, one shaped by culture, memory, and ambition. The process of becoming a tribe was subtle, rooted in shared experiences and mutual dependence. Hunting parties required coordination and trust. Those who failed to follow, or who acted recklessly, endangered not only themselves but the entire group. Food sharing became ritualized, with the strongest or most skilled hunters ensuring that even the weakest survived. Knowledge of plants, animals, and the land itself was passed down through storytelling, demonstration, and careful observation. Around the flickering fires, children watched and learned the ways of the elders, memorizing routes, tracking patterns, and understanding the signs of danger. These early lessons were not merely practical, they became moral codes, the unwritten rules that bound the group together, separating them from outsiders while simultaneously teaching cooperation and empathy. Language began to evolve alongside these social structures, though it was not yet the complex system humans would later develop. Sounds, gestures, and expressions combined to form shared meanings, enabling the group to coordinate hunts, warn of threats, or celebrate success. Even the simplest words carried weight, marking ownership, territory, and identity. Names were given to rivers, hills, and sacred trees, each designation a subtle claim, a declaration that this landscape now carried human significance. Through these early forms of communication, the group solidified its sense of we versus they, preparing the foundation for future interactions, friendship, rivalry, and eventually conflict. Rituals emerged alongside these practical and linguistic developments. Simple ceremonies marked births, deaths, and successful hunts, and through these acts, the early tribes created shared memories that transcended individual lifespans. Stones were placed to commemorate the fallen, fires were kept burning to honor ancestors, and songs arose that wove the experiences of the group into patterns that could be repeated and remembered. These rituals did more than preserve memory, they fostered cohesion, a psychological glue that held the group together even in times of scarcity or danger. The valley, with its rivers and forests, cliffs and plains, became both a stage and a witness to these early performances, its landscapes absorbing and reflecting the rhythms of human culture. Territorial awareness became essential as tribes grew more confident and ambitious. Paths between rivers, hunting grounds, and fertile valleys were carefully observed and defended. The first marks of boundaries appeared, piles of stones, broken branches arranged in patterns, and traces of fire that indicated the presence of a settled group. These markers were not aggressive at first, they were warnings, reminders, and tools for organization. Yet even these simple acts planted the seeds of competition, the subtle tensions that would later escalate into disputes, skirmishes, and full-scale conflict. Each tribe began to define itself not only by its internal cohesion but by its differentiation from neighboring groups, creating a landscape that was as much social as it was physical. Leadership structures were fluid but emerging. Those with experience, skill, or wisdom often assumed authority, guiding hunts, mediating disputes, and making decisions critical to the survival of the tribe. Authority was earned, not inherited, and respect flowed from demonstrated competence. This early hierarchy allowed groups to act with greater coordination, reinforcing the bonds that held them together. Yet leadership also carried risk. Misjudgments could lead to starvation, loss, or vulnerability to external threats. Every decision, from the placement of a shelter to the timing of a hunt, became an act with both immediate and long-term consequences, shaping the tribe's identity. And its relationship with the valley itself. The valley, meanwhile, remained indifferent yet influential. It offered resources, imposed limits, and demanded adaptation. Its rivers teemed with fish, its forests with game, and its fertile plains with plants that could sustain growing populations. Yet the same abundance attracted not only the first humans but, eventually, other groups seeking the same advantages. Every river bend, every hilltop, every grove became contested territory, and the seeds of tribal conflict were planted as surely as the first fires flickered in the darkness. The valley's lessons were constant: respect the land, observe its patterns, and recognize that survival required both cooperation and vigilance. Over time, the tribes developed their own internal cultures, subtle distinctions in clothing, tools, and rituals that set them apart even when sharing the same valley. Tattoos, body paint, or ornaments may have marked belonging. Differences in weapon shapes, hunting techniques, or fire arrangements created identity markers visible to all. These cultural variations reinforced the sense of us versus them, a concept that would come to define the human story in this valley. Every act, from the choice of camp location to the style of ritual, carried weight, signaling alliances, capabilities, and social cohesion to other groups nearby. Even as these communities flourished, the valley tested them relentlessly. Predators still prowled, harsh seasons struck without warning, and accidents could destroy crops or end lives. The tribes learned to move in harmony with these dangers, understanding that resilience required flexibility as well as unity. From these challenges arose ingenuity, new hunting techniques, improved shelters, and more effective fire management. Every success reinforced group identity, while every failure reminded humans of the valley's power and indifference. Here, identity was forged not only through triumph but through shared struggle, shaping the first true human communities in a land that demanded both reverence and resolve. And so, from small family units bound by necessity, the first tribes emerged, shaping the valley with their presence, their labor, and their culture. They marked the beginning of social complexity, of competition and collaboration, of shared memory and identity. The fires of survival became the fires of civilization, and the valley, once a silent witness, now participated in the human story, bearing the footprints, marks, and songs of those who had dared to call it home. In these first tribes, one could see the beginnings of a pattern that would repeat for millennia, the tension between unity and rivalry, creation and destruction, belonging and loss. The valley had become more than a landscape, it was now a living stage for the drama of humanity itself. As the tribes grew in number and confidence, the valley that had once offered abundance without question began to feel the pressure of competing needs. What had been harmony slowly shifted into tension, subtle at first, barely perceptible to the untrained eye. A fallen tree blocking a river crossing, a fertile patch of soil coveted by two groups, or a hunting ground rich with deer became points of contention. The valley, once a neutral stage, now hosted the earliest signs of human rivalry, where cooperation was necessary for survival, but competition was equally inevitable. These first disputes were quiet, marked by wary glances, tense postures, and the silent assessment of strength and strategy. Resource scarcity, even in this fertile land, drove the initial conflicts. Seasonal changes meant that certain areas could no longer sustain as many animals or plants, and the valley's inhabitants were forced to compete for the same essential supplies. Small confrontations arose at riverbanks or berry-laden groves, where one group might try to assert dominance over another simply by being louder, braver, or more persistent. These encounters rarely began with weapons drawn. They were negotiations in tension, body language, and vocalizations that could escalate into aggression if respect was not observed. The humans were learning a fundamental lesson, that coexistence required both tact and strength, and that every choice carried consequences far beyond the immediate moment. The first disputes also carried a moral dimension, rooted in emerging social codes. Who had the right to claim a hunting ground? Was it the strongest, the first to arrive, or the one with the most skill in tracking and capturing prey? Such questions did not have simple answers, and the valley became a crucible in which these debates were lived, rather than theorized. Groups tested each other through subtle displays, mock charges, loud shouts, or the strategic placement of tools and markers. These early confrontations were exercises in diplomacy as much as in aggression, a delicate dance where failure could mean hunger, injury, or loss of status within the tribe itself. Conflict, however, was never limited to resources alone. Pride, reputation, and the desire to assert dominance also played a role. A tribe that had successfully hunted a large stag might be challenged by another eager to prove its own prowess. Young men, newly tested and ambitious, sometimes escalated tensions, their courage outpacing the wisdom of their elders. Such challenges could be fleeting and symbolic, a demonstration of skill or bravery, or they could evolve into full-blown confrontations that left marks on the land and the memory of those who witnessed them. Even victories carried consequences, for every act of aggression invited retaliation, creating a cycle that the valley would witness again and again over the centuries. The valley itself responded to these disputes in subtle ways. Animals shifted their grazing patterns, avoiding areas where human presence grew tense and unpredictable. Rivers became strategic points, not only for resources but as boundaries between groups. Forest clearings, once shared freely, were claimed and defended. The landscape, though silent, reflected the changing dynamics of power, alliance, and rivalry. Humans were learning that their actions rippled outward, influencing not just each other but the very fabric of the ecosystem that sustained them. Every dispute reshaped both society and environment, embedding the consequences of human ambition into the land itself. Early skirmishes were rarely catastrophic but left lasting impressions on the tribes involved. Injuries, stolen tools, and lost food created narratives that would persist, passed from one generation to the next in the form of stories, warnings, and rituals. Elders recounted these incidents as lessons, emphasizing the importance of respect, timing, and strategic thinking. Children absorbed the tension, learning to read subtle cues in posture, tone, and movement. In these small disputes, the foundations of diplomacy, negotiation, and tactical warfare were being laid, skills that would define human behavior in the valley for generations. Despite the tension, these disputes were also moments of learning and adaptation. Tribes discovered the limits of their strength, the capabilities of their neighbors, and the advantages of careful planning. They experimented with alliances, sharing temporary truces to hunt larger animals or defend against predators. Trust was tested, often broken, and rebuilt in new forms. The valley became a living classroom, where success depended on observation, intelligence, and the ability to anticipate the actions of others. Survival was no longer just a matter of skill and instinct, it required foresight, strategy, and a nuanced understanding of human behavior. The psychological impact of these early confrontations was profound. Fear, respect, and ambition intertwined, shaping not only interactions between tribes but also the internal cohesion of each group. Stories of narrow escapes or clever maneuvers became shared myths, reinforcing the social bonds within the tribe. Individuals who demonstrated bravery or ingenuity earned status, while those who failed were reminded of the consequences of misjudgment. Through these early disputes, humans were learning the complex interplay between cooperation and competition, understanding that the survival of the tribe depended on both unity within and awareness of threats from without. Even as disputes arose, the valley retained its quiet majesty. Rivers continued to flow, forests continued to breathe, and animals adapted to the shifting presence of humans. Yet beneath this serenity, the undercurrent of tension remained, a subtle reminder that the valley's abundance was never guaranteed. Every confrontation, no matter how minor, became a part of the valley's evolving story, a prelude to the larger conflicts that would eventually define its history. The land itself seemed to record these early struggles, absorbing the energy of human ambition, caution, and rivalry into the very soil, rocks, and water. And so, the first disputes were not merely conflicts over survival, they were the birth of a deeper, more enduring pattern. They demonstrated that human life in the valley was a constant negotiation between cooperation and competition, abundance and scarcity, courage and caution. Every glance, gesture, and action carried significance, and the valley watched silently, preserving these lessons in its rivers, trees, and hills. In this way, the early disputes shaped not only the lives of those who fought them but also the trajectory of human civilization in the valley. The land was no longer a passive stage, it was an active participant, guiding, testing, and shaping the first generations of tribes that dared to call it home. The valley's rhythm was dictated by forces far older than any human presence, the slow cycles of the sun, the shifting of seasons, and the unpredictable temperament of nature itself. For the tribes that had begun to establish themselves here, life oscillated between moments of abundance and stretches of scarcity, a constant push and pull that shaped both their bodies and their minds. Spring brought fresh shoots and ripening berries, rivers swelling with fish, and meadows painted with wildflowers. The valley seemed generous, offering sustenance with an almost careless abundance. Humans thrived, their bellies full, their spirits lifted by the beauty and generosity surrounding them. During these periods of plenty, the valley resonated with energy. The riverbanks echoed with laughter and song, as children played and adults worked together to harvest, store, and hunt. Tools were sharpened, fires maintained, and rituals performed in gratitude for the bounty. Every action was purposeful, a subtle acknowledgement of the delicate balance between giving and taking. The air carried the sense of cooked meat, crushed leaves, and wet earth, mingling to create a perfume of survival and celebration. Life felt almost easy, almost secure, and for a fleeting time, the valley appeared to exist in harmony with its human inhabitants. Yet abundance was never permanent. As the seasons turned, the valley shifted in ways both subtle and harsh. Rivers receded, fish became scarce, and game animals migrated toward more fruitful lands. Trees shed their leaves, berries dried, and the soil hardened under cold winds. What had once been plenty became hunger, and humans found themselves tested in ways that required ingenuity, resilience, and patience. Scarcity forced them to move carefully, to ration food, and to anticipate the future with a precision that had previously been unnecessary. Every meal became a negotiation with nature itself, a reminder that survival was never guaranteed and that abundance was always fleeting. These cycles of plenty and hunger shaped not only physical survival but the emotional and social lives of the tribes. During times of abundance, humans were generous, sharing resources freely, forging bonds, and celebrating collective success. During scarcity, tensions rose, disputes flared, and the fragile agreements that held tribes together were tested. Fear, frustration, and desperation influenced decisions, shaping hierarchies, alliances, and even the emergence of leadership. The valley was a teacher, instructing its inhabitants in the lessons of patience, foresight, and adaptability. To ignore these lessons was to invite suffering or even death. The relationship between humans and the valley was not merely transactional, it was deeply perceptual. Tribes learned to read subtle signals in the environment, shifts in wind, changes in animal behavior, the texture of soil and the clarity of water. These signs indicated the availability of food, the arrival of storms, or the presence of predators. Knowledge became a currency as valuable as any food or tool, and those who could interpret the land effectively were often the ones whose families survived. Every moment of abundance carried lessons for the lean times, and every period of hunger reinforced the importance of observation, memory, and adaptation. Hunting became both an art and a necessity, shaped by the valley's rhythms. During periods of plenty, groups could take risks, experimenting with techniques, sharing knowledge, and training the next generation in tracking, stalking, and ambush. When hunger threatened, hunting became a precise and cautious endeavor, requiring every skill honed to ensure that effort yielded nourishment. Mistakes carried consequences. A missed opportunity could mean days without food. The valley demanded respect, teaching through reward and penalty alike. Humans learned quickly that the balance between caution and courage, patience and aggression, was the difference between life and death. Foraging and gathering were equally crucial, particularly for the most vulnerable members of the tribes, children, elders, and those unable to hunt. Plants, roots, nuts, and fruits were scrutinized for ripeness, taste, and nutritional value. Knowledge of what could be consumed safely and what might be poisonous became essential. These tasks were not menial, they were critical lessons in observation, memory, and environmental awareness. The valley itself guided these efforts, offering clues in subtle shifts of color, texture, and growth patterns. The dance between plenty and hunger was never predictable, and humans had to remain vigilant, adaptable, and attentive at all times. Scarcity also shaped social dynamics within the tribes. During lean times, leadership and decision-making became more critical, as groups navigated the challenges of rationing and prioritizing resources. Disputes, however minor, could escalate when food was limited, revealing both strengths and weaknesses in alliances, familial bonds, and social hierarchies. Individuals who remained calm, resourceful, and fair were revered, while those who failed under pressure risked marginalization or exclusion. The valley's cycles sculpted not only the land but the character and resilience of those who inhabited it, embedding lessons that would persist for generations. Yet the dance of plenty and hunger was not purely survival, it carried a profound emotional and philosophical dimension. In times of abundance, humans glimpsed the generosity of the world, feeling a fleeting connection to the cycles of life, growth, and renewal. In times of hunger, they confronted mortality directly, understanding that existence was fragile and dependent on both skill and fortune. This interplay of extremes shaped not only bodies and minds but also stories, songs, and rituals that would later define culture. The valley, in its impartial rhythm, became both a physical and spiritual teacher, demonstrating that survival was inseparable from awareness, humility, and respect. Even as scarcity tested them, humans found ways to endure, innovate, and adapt. They stored food, devised strategies to track game, and shared knowledge with younger generations. These responses to the valley's cycle strengthened cohesion and reinforced the bonds that had formed in times of plenty. The landscape itself became a participant in the lessons of survival, with every river bend, forest edge, and hillside serving as both opportunity and warning. Over time, humans internalized the valley's rhythm, moving in harmony with it, learning that existence was a delicate dance between what was given and what had to be earned. Thus, the valley taught a fundamental truth, that abundance and scarcity were inseparable, that life was a continual negotiation with nature, and that humans could thrive only by understanding the rhythm of their surroundings. The dance of plenty and hunger shaped bodies, minds, and social bonds alike, embedding resilience, ingenuity, and foresight into the very fabric of tribal life. It was a cycle that would repeat for generations, marking the valley as both teacher and stage for the unfolding story of human survival, adaptation, and eventual conflict. The valley that had once whispered of quiet rivers and swaying forests now trembled under the heavy march of conflict. The first great battle was not sudden, it was the culmination of months, even years, of tension, disputes, and competition for the valley's most precious resources. Tribes that had coexisted cautiously now faced the harsh reality that abundance could not last for all. Fertile hunting grounds, clean water sources, and safe shelters had become scarce, and the subtle disagreements of the past erupted into open confrontation. The air was charged, thick with anticipation, as if the land itself had sensed the coming storm and held its breath. Before the first blow was struck, both sides gathered silently, eyes scanning, muscles taut, and minds sharp with strategy and fear. The valley's contours, the ridges, river bends, and forest edges, became natural battlegrounds, shaping the movement of fighters and influencing tactics. Spears were sharpened, stones selected for throwing, and rudimentary shields fashioned from bark and hides. Every preparation carried the weight of survival. One misstep could mean death, humiliation, or loss of territory. Even the youngest members, though often kept behind the front lines, understood the stakes, feeling the tension ripple through their communities. The clash began not with a roar but with a subtle spark of violence, a thrown stone, a challenge shouted across the riverbank, a spear aimed to test the courage of the opponent. What followed was a whirlwind of motion. Bodies surged through the forest, leaves and branches whipping against skin, feet pounding on soft earth, and weapons flashing under the dappled light. The valley, long accustomed to the gentle rhythms of life, now became a theater of chaos. Every sound, the cracking of wood, the grunt of exertion, the scream of injury, echoed against hills and cliffs, transforming the landscape into an auditory map of struggle and survival. Predators, always present though usually cautious, watched from the shadows, sensing the disturbance. Wolves paused in their stalking, birds lifted in alarm, and smaller creatures darted to safety. The humans were no longer merely interacting with the valley, they were asserting themselves upon it, challenging not only one another but the natural order. Every movement carried consequences. The terrain favored the observant, the agile, and the cunning, while recklessness led to immediate peril. The land itself became an active participant, shaping outcomes and amplifying the stakes of each confrontation. The battle was as much psychological as physical. Tribes tested each other's courage, resolve, and cohesion. Young warriors sought to prove themselves, while elders monitored the flow of combat, guiding actions, and attempting to maintain structure amid chaos. Strategies emerged instinctively, flanking maneuvers along river bends, ambushes from rocky ridges, and the use of natural barriers to control movement. Noise, movement, and terrain were weapons as effective as any spear or club. In these early battles, humans were learning lessons that would echo for centuries, that power lay not only in strength but in observation, timing, and unity. In the center of the chaos, fire played a pivotal role. Sparks from torches, discarded embers, and accidentally ignited underbrush created zones of danger and opportunity. Smoke swirled around the combatants, obscuring vision and heightening tension, forcing individuals to rely on instinct and training. The smell of burning wood mixed with earth, sweat, and blood, embedding itself in memory. Even in the heat of battle, there were moments of clarity, a glance exchanged, a signal given, a leap that saved a life or claimed one. These moments would be remembered, retold, and eventually mythologized as the first great acts of courage and cunning in the valley. Casualties were inevitable. Some fell to weapons, others were trampled in the confusion of flight or charge. Pain and loss rippled through the tribes, shaping the survivors' understanding of both the valley and each other. Mourning became immediate and practical, the dead were carried to safe areas, fires were lit in tribute, and the survivors adjusted their strategies, learning from mistakes that had cost lives. Every injury, every life taken, became part of the collective memory, reinforcing social bonds among those who remained and shaping the cultural fabric of the tribe. Despite the violence, there were moments of fleeting strategy and brilliance. Leaders demonstrated foresight, anticipating moves and countering threats with precision. Young warriors learned quickly, adapting to the chaos and discovering the advantages of terrain, surprise, and coordination. These early battles taught not only survival but the principles of warfare, the importance of planning, the power of fear, the value of alliances, and the devastating consequences of overconfidence. The valley itself absorbed these lessons, marking the land with footprints, trampled vegetation, broken branches, and scorched earth that would remain as silent witnesses to the struggle. The battle also highlighted the psychological toll of conflict. Fear, adrenaline, grief, and triumph mingled, creating an intensity that shaped identity and social structure. Survivors understood their limits, tested their courage, and gained status based on deeds observed by peers. Those who faltered were often marginalized, while those who excelled became symbols of strength, wisdom, or bravery. These dynamics reinforced the hierarchy within each tribe, creating an early blueprint for leadership and social cohesion based on merit and survival. As the day waned, the combatants began to withdraw, exhausted and bloodied. The valley returned, gradually, to its familiar rhythm, though scarred and altered by the events that had unfolded. Rivers continued to flow, winds rustled through trees, and animals cautiously re-emerged, adapting to the changes in their environment. The humans, too, began to process the consequences, loss, injury, and the fragile sense of victory. They tended the wounded, buried the dead, and reflected on the strategies that had worked and those that had failed. The lessons of the first great battle were etched not only in memory but in the very soil, water, and vegetation of the valley. Even in retreat, the valley remained an active participant. Every ridge, river bend, and forested path had influenced the battle's outcome, favoring the observant and punishing the reckless. Humans had learned to respect the land not only for its resources but for its role as an arbiter, a silent force that shaped history. They understood that the valley could offer protection, advantage, and sustenance, but that it could also demand caution, strategy, and humility. Survival and victory were inseparable from awareness of the terrain and the rhythms of life that it enforced. By the end of this first great battle, the valley had witnessed the birth of a new reality, that human ambition, intelligence, and competition would forever transform its landscapes. The valley was no longer a passive observer but an active stage where courage, strategy, and tragedy played out in vivid detail. Every scar, broken branch, and displaced stone told the story of human struggle, resilience, and the first taste of organized conflict. From this day forward, the rhythm of life in the valley would be forever intertwined with rivalry, ambition, and the relentless pursuit of survival, setting the stage for centuries of human drama yet to come. The first great battle had ended, leaving the valley scarred and quiet, yet profoundly altered. Fires had died down, smoke lingering in the air, curling like ghostly reminders of the conflict. Branches and underbrush were trampled, footprints pressed deeply into the soil, and scattered stones marked the places where courage, fear, and desperation had collided. The tribes moved slowly among the remnants of the battlefield, tending to the wounded, mourning the dead, and gathering what could be salvaged from the chaos. Silence hung heavily over the land, punctuated only by the cries of birds and the cautious movements of returning animals. The valley seemed to exhale, as if acknowledging the end of violence and the return to a fragile calm. Survivors walked in a careful procession, their bodies aching and spirits heavy. The first lesson of battle was immediate, the fragility of life and the weight of loss. Elders, who had guided strategy and witnessed the unfolding chaos, were both revered and burdened with responsibility. Their eyes carried the memory of choices made and consequences faced, the understanding that each decision had ripple effects extending far beyond the moment. Young warriors, though exhilarated by their displays of strength or skill, also bore the imprint of fear and the shock of mortality. In this way, the battle became not only a physical struggle but an emotional and psychological crucible, shaping character, status, and the bonds that held each tribe together. The dead were treated with care, each burial or placement a ritual in remembrance and respect. Simple markers, stones arranged in patterns, small piles of leaves, or fires kept burning overnight, honored the lives lost, creating a tapestry of memory that intertwined with the land itself. These acts were more than practical, they were symbolic, instilling in the living a recognition of mortality, the impermanence of achievement, and the importance of communal care. Even in grief, humans sought meaning, finding solace in ritual, storytelling, and the continuity of life that persisted despite loss. Reflection was not limited to mourning. The survivors analyzed the battle, identifying what had worked and what had failed. Strategic positions, the use of terrain, timing, and coordination were all scrutinized. The lessons learned were recorded mentally and orally, shared among elders and younger members alike. These reflections were the seeds of knowledge that would guide future encounters, the foundation of wisdom passed down through generations. Every mistake became a warning, every success a model to emulate. The valley itself seemed to absorb these reflections, its rivers, hills, and forests holding the memory of strategy, fear, and resilience in every contour. The physical landscape bore the battle's imprint. Flattened clearings, scorched underbrush, and displaced stones marked where struggle had erupted. Trails became altered, riversides eroded, and forest edges compressed under the weight of thousands of footsteps. The valley, though enduring and patient, recorded every movement, creating a subtle map of human activity and conflict. Even the smallest plants were trampled, leaving scars that would take seasons to heal. In this way, the valley became both witness and participant, a living record of human ambition, struggle, and adaptation. Emotionally, the aftermath was complex. Triumph and sorrow coexisted, pride mingling with regret. Those who had survived felt a heightened awareness of their vulnerability and the value of life, while those who had proven themselves in combat gained stature within their tribe. Fear lingered, not only of the opposing group but of nature itself, which had remained indifferent yet influential throughout the battle. Every rustle in the underbrush, every shadow along the river, reminded humans that survival required vigilance, adaptability, and respect for forces beyond their control. The valley encouraged reflection in quieter ways, too. The rivers resumed their gentle flow, birds returned to survey familiar trees, and animals cautiously explored paths cleared by human movement. The wind carried the scent of water, soil, and vegetation, soothing frayed nerves and providing a reminder of life's continuity. Night fell, blanketing the valley in stars, the heavens offering perspective on the smallness of human conflict against the vastness of time and space. Around fires, survivors contemplated not only the battle but their place in the larger story of the valley, understanding that while victory and loss were immediate, life endured beyond individual events. Social structures within the tribes subtly shifted in the aftermath. Leadership, tested under fire, was reaffirmed or challenged, and hierarchies became clearer as abilities, judgment, and courage were assessed. Alliances within the group were reinforced, and in some cases, fractures became evident, revealing weaknesses in cohesion or trust. The valley, through its trials, acted as both teacher and arbiter, emphasizing the necessity of cooperation and the consequences of failure. Humans learned that the bonds forged in conflict were often stronger than those formed in ease, and that survival depended not only on individual skill but on the resilience of the group as a whole. Reflection extended to strategy for future encounters. Tribes reconsidered territorial boundaries, resource management, and methods of defense. Observation of the opponent's tactics provided insights for future confrontations, while the survivors refined hunting, foraging, and sheltering practices. Knowledge accumulated, forming the early framework of long-term planning and foresight. The valley's cycles of plenty and scarcity intersected with these lessons, reinforcing the idea that life required careful attention to both immediate needs and long-term survival. In the quiet aftermath, the valley offered a rare opportunity for introspection. Humans, gathered in small groups, listened to the whispers of the wind, the flowing of rivers, and the rustling of leaves. They reflected on their mortality, their strength, and the interdependence that had allowed them to endure. Even as scars and traces of the battle remained, the valley's enduring beauty reminded them of life beyond conflict. This duality, violence and serenity, loss and renewal, became a central theme in the consciousness of the tribes, shaping philosophy, ritual, and the stories they would tell for generations. Thus, the first great battle and its aftermath were more than a test of strength or strategy. They were a lesson in mortality, resilience, and the complexity of human society. The valley, once a passive backdrop, had become an active participant, shaping behavior, memory, and identity. From the ashes of conflict, humans learned to navigate not only physical challenges but the emotional and social intricacies of survival. They understood that the land, life, and each other were interconnected, and that reflection, memory, and adaptation were as vital as courage, skill, and force. In the wake of the first great battle, the valley became a complex tapestry of relationships, tension, and negotiation. Survival alone was no longer sufficient. Tribes had learned that strength often depended on the ability to form alliances as much as on physical power. Some groups discovered that cooperation could secure access to hunting grounds, fertile riverbanks, and shared knowledge of the land's subtle cues. Others, driven by ambition or fear, sowed rivalry and distrust, marking the beginning of a social landscape as intricate as the physical one they inhabited. The valley was no longer simply a source of sustenance, it was a stage for diplomacy, cunning, and the intricate dance of human politics. The first alliances were tentative, often cemented through shared rituals, exchanges of food, or joint hunting expeditions. Tribes that had once eyed one another warily now approached with cautious curiosity, testing trust and loyalty through small, deliberate gestures. An offer of assistance in hunting, a shared fire during a cold night, or the protection of children and elders created bonds that were fragile yet vital. These early acts of cooperation demonstrated a growing understanding that survival and prosperity depended on relationships, not only within a tribe but between them. The valley had become both teacher and arbiter, rewarding foresight, negotiation, and diplomacy while punishing short-sightedness and aggression. Yet alliances were never simple or permanent. Human nature, sharpened by scarcity, ambition, and pride, made trust a constant negotiation. Suspicion lingered beneath every handshake, and past injuries or perceived slights threatened to undo fragile agreements. The memory of the first battle remained vivid, shaping interactions and influencing decisions. Tribes had learned that alliances could offer protection and opportunity, but they also introduced new risks. Betrayal, miscommunication, or envy could ignite conflict as quickly as any dispute over resources. The valley watched these interactions silently, its rivers flowing steadily, its forests observing the fragile dance of human cooperation and competition. Rivalries intensified as tribes vied for dominance over the same fertile lands and critical resources. Hunting grounds, particularly those rich in game, became flashpoints for tension, while river crossings and shelter sites were contested for strategic advantage. Early conflicts were often subtle, manifesting as challenges of skill, intimidation displays, or calculated incursions into rival territory. These confrontations were as much about reputation and social standing as they were about immediate survival, shaping the perceptions of both allies and opponents. Over time, these patterns of competition solidified, creating a social hierarchy of influence, fear, and respect that underpinned the valley's unfolding history. Communication became central to both alliances and rivalries. Tribes developed early forms of signals, sounds, gestures, and marks on trees or rocks, to convey warnings, requests, or invitations. Shared rituals and ceremonies reinforced bonds between allied groups, while subtle cues and symbolic acts warned rivals of boundaries and intentions. Observation, interpretation, and deception became skills as valuable as hunting or combat, shaping the valley's evolving social landscape. Those who mastered the art of reading the land and understanding human behavior gained an advantage, their insight allowing them to navigate the delicate balance of friendship and enmity. Alliances also influenced culture, ritual, and identity. Shared ceremonies, feasts, and storytelling sessions strengthened bonds between groups, creating shared narratives that transcended individual tribes. Knowledge of plants, animals, and seasonal cycles was exchanged, expanding the practical understanding of the environment. Even minor alliances required compromise, negotiation, and respect for different customs, which in turn fostered cognitive and social sophistication. Through these interactions, humans were not only surviving, they were shaping culture, philosophy, and social order, building the foundations for complex societies yet to come. Yet every alliance carried the potential for betrayal. Scarcity, ambition, and pride created opportunities for conflict even among the closest allies. A dispute over hunting grounds, a perceived insult, or a failure to support a partner in times of need could fracture relationships instantly. The valley, with its constant cycles of abundance and scarcity, amplified these risks, turning simple disagreements into potentially lethal confrontations. The early tribes quickly understood that survival demanded vigilance, adaptability, and the ability to balance cooperation with caution. Trust was earned through consistent action, observation, and shared experience, never freely given. Rivalries and alliances also shaped leadership and social hierarchies within each tribe. Leaders were evaluated not only for their combat skills but for their ability to negotiate, anticipate threats, and manage relationships. Those who successfully navigated both internal and external politics gained influence, while those who faltered faced marginalization or loss of status. The interplay of alliances and rivalries created a dynamic environment where strategy and social intelligence were as crucial as physical strength. Survival depended not merely on hunting or defense but on the subtle management of human relationships and the careful reading of social cues. The valley itself responded to these dynamics. Pathways were created and maintained for trade or cooperation, hunting grounds were monitored and defended, and riverbanks became zones of negotiation and observation. Even the natural landscape, the forests, hills, and rivers, shaped the strategies employed by tribes. Leaders and strategists learned to anticipate not only human action but the influence of terrain, weather, and seasonal changes on the movement and behavior of both allies and rivals. The valley's impartial rhythms continued to teach lessons, guiding humans in the subtle interplay of power, trust, and survival. As generations passed, the patterns of alliances and rivalries solidified into traditions, stories, and unwritten codes of conduct. Lessons learned from the first confrontations, negotiations, and betrayals became cultural memory, influencing the behavior and expectations of both elders and youth. Children grew up observing the delicate balance of friendship and competition, understanding the stakes of loyalty, courage, and prudence. Through this intricate web of relationships, the valley became a crucible for social evolution, shaping human behavior and laying the groundwork for the complex societies that would eventually emerge. Thus, the interplay of alliances and rivalries transformed the valley from a place of mere survival into a landscape rich with strategy, emotion, and social complexity. Life was no longer measured only in days survived or prey captured but in relationships navigated, trust earned, and rivalries managed. Every interaction, every subtle gesture, and every carefully chosen action carried weight, influencing not only immediate outcomes but the long-term trajectory of human civilization in the valley. The land, once indifferent, had become a mirror reflecting human ambition, ingenuity, and the fragile yet powerful bonds that defined early society. Beyond the rivers and open plains of the valley, the forest stood as an enigmatic realm, dense, shadowed, and full of life that humans could barely comprehend. For the tribes, it was both a source of sustenance and a place of profound mystery. Trees towered like ancient sentinels, their roots entwined with the soil in ways that seemed almost deliberate, as if the forest itself was alive and aware of intruders. Sunlight filtered through thick canopies, creating patterns of light and shadow that shifted with every hour, every wind gust, and every passing cloud. The forest was a labyrinth, unpredictable yet teeming with opportunity, offering both danger and the promise of discovery to those willing to explore its depths. The forest held its secrets tightly. Every rustle of leaves or snap of a twig could signal predator or prey, friend or foe. Tribes quickly learned to read these signs, developing acute senses and intuition. They understood that the behavior of animals, the shapes of plants, and even the smell of earth could provide critical information about food sources, water locations, and hidden threats. The forest was alive with patterns, and those who could interpret them gained an advantage. Knowledge of these patterns became a currency of survival, passing silently from elders to the younger generation through careful demonstration and observation. Hunting in the forest required patience, cunning, and a deep understanding of its rhythms. Unlike the open plains, where visibility allowed for direct pursuit, the dense forest forced humans to adapt. Tracking became an art. Subtle impressions on soft soil, broken branches, and bent grass were read with meticulous care. Predators and prey alike left traces that revealed movements, habits, and vulnerabilities. Human senses sharpened, not just to detect immediate danger, but to anticipate patterns across days, weeks, and even seasons. Every successful hunt reinforced both practical skill and psychological resilience, embedding the forest's lessons deeply in tribal memory. Plants, too, offered hidden knowledge and resources. Roots, berries, and leaves carried nourishment, but only when recognized correctly. Some were medicinal, others poisonous, some provided fibers for tools or clothing, while others served symbolic or ritual purposes. The forest demanded attention to detail, rewarding observation and patience while punishing ignorance with illness or injury. Learning its secrets was slow and cumulative, a process requiring repeated engagement, trial and error, and deep respect for the environment. Over time, humans developed a nuanced understanding, treating the forest not merely as a backdrop for survival, but as a teacher and partner in life. The forest was also a place of refuge and strategy. During times of conflict, tribes could retreat into its shadows, using dense undergrowth and natural barriers to evade pursuers. Ambushes were planned among twisted roots and hidden clearings, while lookout points were chosen along ridges and canopy gaps. Understanding the forest structure became a critical element of survival, blending observation, memory, and intuition into a sophisticated knowledge system. These skills were taught deliberately, orally and experientially, forming part of the tribal curriculum that intertwined practical survival with cultural identity. Yet the forest was not just a practical resource, it carried spiritual and philosophical significance. Its depth, darkness, and quiet majesty inspired awe, fear, and reflection. Humans sensed that life here was larger than themselves, a network of forces and beings both visible and hidden. Shadows between trees could conceal predators, prey, or mysterious phenomena, and the constant play of light and dark suggested cycles beyond immediate comprehension. Stories emerged to explain strange noises, shifting shapes, or sudden gaps in the canopy. Rituals were performed in sacred clearings, offerings left at remarkable trees, and songs composed to honor the unseen guardians of the forest. In these ways, the forest became a repository of both knowledge and imagination, shaping belief, philosophy, and cultural memory. Observation of forest creatures offered lessons in strategy, cooperation, and survival. Predators, from stealthy cats to cunning birds, demonstrated patience, planning, and adaptation. Herbivores revealed patterns in migration, feeding, and safety. Human hunters learned to emulate, anticipate, and sometimes exploit these behaviors, turning observation into survival strategy. Every encounter reinforced awareness of rhythm, timing, and consequence, teaching the essential principle that life in the valley was a complex web of interdependencies, where humans were participants, not masters. The forest also tested social bonds within tribes. Small parties navigating its depths required coordination, trust, and shared knowledge. A single misstep, disturbing a hidden predator, misreading a trail, or failing to signal a hazard, could endanger all members. These excursions were as much exercises in teamwork and leadership as they were in resource acquisition. Skills in communication, empathy, and mutual protection were honed here, creating cohesion that extended beyond hunting expeditions into the social and political fabric of the tribe. Seasons amplified the forest's secrets and challenges. In spring, flowers and fresh shoots provided nourishment, while streams swelled with rain, reshaping paths and altering access. Summer heat made foraging exhausting, yet certain fruits and roots reached peak ripeness. Autumn signaled the migration of game and the ripening of nuts, critical for storing food for winter. And winter itself imposed silence, with frozen streams, snow-laden branches, and the scarcity of prey testing endurance, cooperation, and ingenuity. Each cycle deepened understanding, forcing humans to observe, adapt, and respect the forest's rhythms in order to survive. Even in moments of calm, the forest maintained a presence that shaped thought, emotion, and culture. Its quiet majesty inspired stories of creation, morality, and the interdependence of life. Humans reflected on their place in this larger world, seeing in the forest a mirror of both vulnerability and possibility. Rituals, songs, and storytelling integrated the forest's lessons into tribal identity, teaching that survival required not only strength and skill but observation, respect, and harmony with forces greater than oneself. Thus, the forest was far more than a mere collection of trees and creatures. It was a living classroom, a strategic battlefield, a source of sustenance, and a repository of cultural and philosophical insight. Humans learned to navigate its shadows, interpret its signs, and respect its power. Its secrets shaped not only survival but cognition, social structure, and identity. In every rustle of leaves, every bird call, and every shifting pattern of sunlight, the valley's inhabitants discovered lessons that would resonate across generations. The forest had become an inseparable part of human life, a source of knowledge, awe, and challenge, teaching that mastery of the land was inseparable from understanding oneself and one's place within the broader rhythms of existence. Even as the forest offered refuge and sustenance, the valley was never truly silent. Beyond the rustling leaves and flowing rivers, the faint echoes of rival tribes drifted through the landscape. These whispers, footsteps in distant clearings, the crack of a branch under unseen movement, the faint calls of hunters signaling presence, kept humans alert, shaping their thoughts, decisions, and actions. Awareness of others' existence became as critical as understanding the land itself. Survival depended not only on reading the forest and the valley but on anticipating the intentions, strengths, and strategies of neighboring groups. Every sound, shadow, and trace could carry meaning, a subtle warning or invitation that demanded careful interpretation. The tribes quickly learned that vigilance extended beyond immediate survival. Knowledge of rivals' locations, behaviors, and habits became a currency as valuable as food or water. Scouts moved quietly, observing from high ridges, concealed within dense foliage, or across riverbanks. They noted patterns in movement, hunting strategies, and even daily routines. This information allowed leaders to predict opportunities for cooperation or confrontation, ensuring that every action, whether for hunting, foraging, or defense, was informed by a broader awareness of the valley's human landscape. Such intelligence gathering became a cornerstone of strategy, blending observation, memory, and intuition. Whispers of rival tribes shaped social organization within each group. Leaders emerged not only for their skill in combat but for their ability to interpret signals, make timely decisions, and anticipate potential threats. Young hunters were trained in stealth, observation, and the subtle art of reading tracks, learning that a single misjudgment could endanger the tribe. Knowledge was meticulously passed down, orally and through demonstration, creating an intricate web of shared understanding. This constant vigilance fostered cohesion, discipline, and mutual reliance, reinforcing bonds while simultaneously heightening tension and anxiety. The presence of rivals also influenced resource management. Tribes became strategic in their use of hunting grounds, foraging paths, and water sources, often leaving misleading signs to protect their territory or misdirect others. Paths were chosen with care, clearings monitored for signs of intrusion, and seasonal migrations timed to avoid clashes. This tactical approach extended beyond mere survival. It became a form of social intelligence, teaching foresight, patience, and adaptability. Humans were learning that the valley's abundance could not be claimed by strength alone. It required cunning, discretion, and an understanding of others' behavior. Whispers of rivals carried psychological weight. Even the faintest hint of intrusion could provoke anxiety, sharpening senses and accelerating learning. Stories of other tribes' cunning or past aggression were retold around fires, reinforcing caution and strategy. Fear became a tool as well as a guide, teaching respect for both the environment and other humans. These mental exercises were crucial. They allowed tribes to anticipate challenges, avoid ambushes, and navigate the valley with heightened awareness. The mind became as important a tool as the spear or bow, shaping decisions with foresight and intuition. Yet not all whispers heralded conflict. Some became opportunities for alliances, exchanges, or temporary truces. Shared resources, combined hunting expeditions, or mutual protection against predators allowed tribes to navigate scarcity and danger collaboratively. Diplomatic gestures, a gift of food, a protective signal, or a shared ceremony, could strengthen bonds and foster trust. These moments required careful judgment, as missteps could easily be misinterpreted as weakness or insult, leading to escalation rather than cooperation. The valley, impartial and vast, provided both space and challenge for these subtle negotiations. Observation of rival tribes also contributed to the development of strategy and innovation. By watching others' hunting methods, tool-making techniques, and movement patterns, humans adapted and refined their own skills. Rivalry fostered creativity, resilience, and ingenuity, turning competition into a catalyst for progress. Every successful strategy, every clever maneuver, and every lesson gleaned from observation contributed to collective knowledge, reinforcing the understanding that survival in the valley required constant learning and adaptation. The valley itself seemed to amplify these whispers. Terrain, ridges, rivers, dense underbrush, both concealed and revealed the movements of others. Sounds traveled differently depending on wind, vegetation, and topography, creating a complex acoustic map that could inform or deceive. Humans learned to interpret these signals with precision, distinguishing between the passage of prey, predators, and rival hunters. The land became a partner in observation, shaping behavior and reinforcing the subtle intelligence necessary for survival. As these patterns became embedded in daily life, the valley's inhabitants developed a sophisticated awareness of interdependence. Every interaction, whether direct or indirect, carried significance. Even small gestures, footprints, or discarded tools became part of a broader network of knowledge, influencing decisions and shaping relationships. The whispers of rival tribes were thus both threat and teacher, shaping behavior, social organization, and strategy. Humans came to understand that survival required constant vigilance, careful interpretation of signs, and a nuanced understanding of the valley's social and physical landscape. Emotionally, these whispers nurtured a mixture of fear, respect, and anticipation. Anxiety sharpened senses, stories reinforced lessons, and the unknown created space for imagination and philosophy. What might be hiding in the shadows? Who watched from a ridge or a hidden path? These questions deepened awareness, fostering a blend of caution and curiosity. Through these subtle interactions, humans honed not only practical skills but also insight into social dynamics, risk assessment, and foresight, preparing them for challenges both immediate and distant. Thus, the whispers of rival tribes were more than mere sounds, they were a continuous, dynamic force shaping the valley's human landscape. They guided strategy, informed social organization, fostered learning, and heightened awareness of both the environment and other humans. Every rustle, every faint call, and every distant trace carried meaning, reinforcing the understanding that life in the valley required constant attention, adaptation, and respect. In this way, the quiet voices of rivals became an integral part of the valley's rhythm, teaching that survival depended not only on strength but on perception, wisdom, and the ability to navigate a world alive with both opportunity and danger. The valley, scarred by battles and shaped by cycles of plenty and hunger, also pulsed with life in more subtle, sacred ways. Amid the toil of hunting, gathering, and survival, the tribes carved out moments of reflection and reverence, giving rise to rituals that bound them to each other and to the land itself. These practices were not mere superstition, they were deeply practical and profoundly symbolic, serving to strengthen social cohesion, teach lessons about nature, and reinforce the moral and philosophical fabric of life. Firelight flickered across gathered faces as songs, dances, and chants transformed mundane survival into shared experience, bridging the tangible and the spiritual. Rituals often centered on the cycles of the valley, the rising and setting of the sun, the swelling and receding of rivers, and the changing seasons. During spring, ceremonies honored renewal and abundance, celebrating the first shoots of edible plants, the return of migratory animals, and the promise of growth. These celebrations were marked by offerings, symbolic acts of gratitude, and communal meals that reinforced bonds. Every gesture carried meaning: a carefully placed stone, a bow drawn in salute, or a chant repeated in harmony served as a reminder of the delicate balance between humans and the land. The valley's generosity was acknowledged and internalized, creating a profound sense of connection and responsibility. In contrast, rituals during lean seasons carried a more somber tone. Autumn and winter ceremonies emphasized endurance, survival, and reflection. Stories of ancestors, legendary hunts, and battles past were recounted, teaching lessons of strategy, courage, and resilience. Music, often generated with rudimentary drums, flutes, or striking stones, provided rhythm for dances that mimicked the hunt, the chase, or the struggle against adversity. These practices were both cathartic and instructive, allowing the community to process loss, reinforce hierarchy, and prepare psychologically for the challenges of scarcity. They were living archives, preserving collective memory while teaching practical survival skills through embodied experience. Rituals also marked individual milestones, such as coming of age, successful hunts, or displays of leadership. Young warriors were initiated with symbolic tasks designed to test courage, intelligence, and resourcefulness. Elders guided them through trials that often involved navigating dangerous terrain, interpreting animal tracks, or performing symbolic gestures that demonstrated understanding of the valley's cycles. These rites of passage were both practical and philosophical, embedding lessons about responsibility, mortality, and the interdependence of human communities within the very acts themselves. Participation reinforced status, nurtured respect, and ensured continuity of knowledge across generations. The valley's landscapes became stages for these rituals. Sacred clearings, hilltops overlooking rivers, and ancient groves were chosen for their symbolism and strategic significance. Each location carried history: a tree scarred by lightning, a stone formation resembling a gate, or a natural spring that nourished both humans and animals. These sites became anchors for storytelling, observation, and spiritual reflection. Humans moved with awareness and reverence, recognizing that the valley itself was a teacher, witness, and participant in the cycles of life, death, and renewal that these rituals honored. Water, fire, and stone played central roles in ritual practices. Rivers were crossed with caution and intention, streams were used to purify participants, and water was offered as a symbol of sustenance and life. Fires were lit not only for warmth and cooking but as centers of communal gathering and communication with the unseen. Stones were arranged to mark boundaries, honor ancestors, or signify the presence of spirits within the landscape. Through these tangible elements, humans expressed intangible concepts: gratitude, fear, respect, and hope, embedding philosophical insight into physical acts that shaped memory, behavior, and cultural continuity. Rituals also served as platforms for reconciliation and diplomacy between tribes. Shared ceremonies reduced tension, created opportunities for alliance, and allowed rival groups to observe each other in moments of peaceful cooperation. Gifts, shared meals, and coordinated performances reinforced social bonds, creating networks of trust that extended beyond individual tribes. The subtlety of these exchanges reflected deep understanding: gestures had to be interpreted correctly, timing mattered, and respect for boundaries was paramount. These ceremonies were as strategic as they were symbolic, blending politics, philosophy, and survival into a unified practice. Observation and mimicry were critical components of ritual learning. Young members observed elders carefully, noting every gesture, chant, and movement. Mistakes were corrected gently but firmly, emphasizing precision, respect, and attention to detail. Over time, these practices cultivated patience, awareness, and cultural literacy. Humans learned to see themselves as part of a broader web of life, recognizing the interconnection of actions, consequences, and shared experience. The valley, with its cycles and rhythms, reinforced these lessons, making ritual a continuous dialogue between human behavior and the environment. Seasonal festivals highlighted the valley's unpredictable generosity. The sudden return of game, the ripening of wild fruits, or the unexpected flow of water inspired spontaneous celebrations, often accompanied by elaborate dances, songs, and feasts. These moments of joy were profound reminders of the unpredictability and beauty of life. Conversely, festivals during periods of hardship emphasized endurance, careful planning, and communal support. Together, they created a rhythm of life that mirrored the natural cycles of the valley, alternating between abundance and scarcity, action and reflection, risk and caution. Even in solitude, rituals influenced thought and perception. Hunters alone in the forest, gatherers tending roots, and elders observing the stars participated in subtle acts of reflection and homage. Every glance, every movement, every whispered acknowledgement of the unseen shaped cognition, memory, and identity. The valley's rituals were not confined to ceremonies, they were woven into daily life, guiding behavior, shaping relationships, and embedding philosophical insight into survival itself. They were living lessons, transmitted across generations, creating a culture in which the sacred and practical were inseparable. Thus, the rituals of the valley became more than tradition, they were a framework for understanding life, survival, and human society. They taught observation, discipline, cooperation, and foresight while embedding a sense of awe, respect, and humility. Through fire, water, stone, dance, and song, humans forged a connection with the land, their communities, and the larger cycles of existence. These practices created continuity, memory, and identity, ensuring that even as battles scarred the valley and rivalries flared, the philosophical and cultural heart of human life remained intact. The rituals were a compass, guiding thought, action, and spirit, affirming that survival was inseparable from reverence, reflection, and the careful observation of both human and natural worlds. In the valley, survival demanded more than strength or courage, it required discipline, foresight, and an unspoken agreement that bound hunters together. The hunter's code was not written on stone or parchment, it was etched into memory, taught through observation, repetition, and experience. Every tribe developed its own version, yet the underlying principles remained universal: respect for the land, understanding of prey, cooperation among hunters, and an awareness of the delicate balance between life taken and life preserved. This code shaped behavior, strategy, and philosophy, ensuring that each act of hunting was both effective and ethical, embedded within a broader understanding of survival. Hunters learned early that arrogance or recklessness could cost lives. The valley rewarded patience, calculation, and observation. Young apprentices followed elders silently, mimicking their movements, listening to subtle sounds, and noting the positions of trees, rocks, and river bends. The elders spoke little, but their guidance was precise, teaching the significance of every snapped twig, bent blade of grass, and displaced stone. Mistakes were instructive but costly, lessons learned through failure became ingrained, forming the backbone of instinctive knowledge. The code demanded humility, emphasizing that mastery was a continuous process, requiring attention to both the environment and one's own limitations. Observation of prey was central to the code. Hunters tracked animals not only for sustenance but to understand behavior, migration, and patterns over time. A successful hunt depended on predicting movements, anticipating reactions, and respecting the natural instincts of prey. Each encounter reinforced lessons about timing, patience, and strategic planning. Observing the forest and its inhabitants became an exercise in humility and awareness. Humans learned that domination was temporary, and that the valley demanded careful adaptation and respect for its rules. Cooperation among hunters was equally critical. The code emphasized that individual prowess mattered little without coordination, trust, and communication. Groups moved with precision, signaling through gestures, subtle calls, or silent glances. Roles were assigned according to skill, experience, and intuition. Some distracted prey, others flanked, while others prepared traps or ambushes. Each action relied on the others, creating a choreography that blended instinct, observation, and strategy. These practices reinforced social cohesion, teaching that survival was inseparable from the strength of relationships, trust, and shared purpose. Respect for the land was a central tenet of the code. Hunters were taught to avoid overexploitation, to leave water sources and paths undisturbed when possible, and to take only what was needed. The valley's cycles of abundance and scarcity shaped this ethic, instilling a long-term perspective that extended beyond immediate survival. Fires were carefully managed, tracks were minimized, and natural habitats were preserved. This respect was not solely practical, it was also philosophical. Humans recognized that life depended on life, and that the balance of the valley required both action and restraint. The code also encompassed rituals surrounding the hunt. Before departure, hunters might perform a quiet ceremony acknowledging the spirits of the forest, the animals, and the forces that governed life. Offerings, chants, or symbolic gestures honored the prey and reinforced ethical responsibility. Success was celebrated with humility, and failure was a reminder of mortality and the need for reflection. Through these practices, hunting was transformed from mere subsistence into a philosophical and communal act, embedding lessons about respect, patience, and interconnectedness into daily life. Adaptation and learning were continuous. Every hunt, every encounter with prey, and every observation of the rival tribes provided lessons that refined the code. Hunters memorized terrain, animal behaviors, and patterns of rivals, integrating these insights into strategy. Mistakes became stories, warnings, and teaching tools for the next generation. The valley itself served as mentor, showing the consequences of miscalculation, impatience, or disrespect. Over time, the code evolved, incorporating both practical and ethical guidance, forming a living, flexible framework that guided action and thought alike. The psychological dimensions of the code were profound. Hunters faced fear, fatigue, and uncertainty with discipline, relying on training, experience, and trust in one another. Mental clarity, awareness of surroundings, and controlled emotion were considered as essential as physical skill. Observation extended beyond prey to include subtle signs in the environment, movements of rival tribes, and even changes in weather. Mastery of the mind, as much as the body, became a measure of success. Hunters learned that patience, vigilance, and adaptability were as decisive as strength or courage, forming the psychological foundation of survival. Leadership and mentorship were intertwined with the code. Experienced hunters guided the young, instilling values and skills through demonstration, storytelling, and gradual responsibility. Leadership was earned through competence, wisdom, and the ability to inspire trust. Mistakes by leaders were instructive but scrutinized, ensuring accountability and reinforcing the ethical dimension of hunting. This system created a continuity of knowledge, transmitting both practical and philosophical lessons across generations. It also fostered resilience, as tribes learned to navigate adversity through collective experience, strategic planning, and adherence to shared principles. Ultimately, the hunter's code was a reflection of the valley itself, complex, demanding, and interconnected. It taught that survival was not merely a function of strength or courage but of observation, respect, cooperation, and adaptability. The ethical framework embedded in the code ensured that every act, every decision, and every hunt was a dialogue with the environment, the community, and the broader rhythms of life. Through the code, humans learned to balance ambition with humility, action with reflection, and mastery with respect, forging a philosophy of survival that transcended immediate need and shaped the culture, strategy, and identity of the tribes for generations to come. Flowing through the heart of the valley, the great river was more than a source of water, it was a living presence, a silent witness to generations of triumph, loss, and survival. Its waters glimmered under sunlight and shimmered under moonlight, reflecting both the beauty and the harsh realities of life. The river's course shaped the land, carving valleys, nourishing forests, and creating fertile floodplains. To the tribes, it was both a lifeline and a teacher, revealing lessons about timing, resourcefulness, and the consequences of human action. Every ripple, bend, and eddy seemed imbued with memory, as though the river itself carried stories of every hunt, battle, and ritual that had taken place along its banks. The river dictated movement, settlement, and strategy. Camps were established near its bends, where fish and game were plentiful, water was accessible, and natural defenses were advantageous. Hunters learned to read its currents, predict seasonal changes, and anticipate the behavior of animals drawn to its life-giving waters. Crossing points were carefully chosen, for shallow fords could provide safe passage, while deeper channels hid unseen danger. Every interaction with the river required respect, knowledge, and caution. Those who ignored its rhythms often paid a harsh price, learning that mastery over nature demanded humility and attention. The river also served as a map and guide for the valley's inhabitants. Its banks marked boundaries between tribal territories, and its tributaries indicated hidden hunting grounds and foraging sites. Seasonal changes in water level revealed patterns in fish migration, plant growth, and predator movement. Observant humans learned to interpret these signs with precision, integrating environmental intelligence into daily decision-making. This knowledge was shared through oral instruction, demonstration, and ritual, forming a continuous dialogue between the river, the land, and the people. The river's voice, though silent, shaped every aspect of survival. Beyond sustenance, the river carried symbolic and spiritual significance. Its ceaseless flow was seen as a mirror of life, moving unceasingly through joy, sorrow, growth, and decay. Elders taught that the river knew all, every human decision, every act of courage or folly, every alliance and betrayal. Tribes treated it with reverence, offering thanks, leaving small tokens, and performing ceremonies along its banks. Water from the river was used in purification rituals, blessings for hunts, and rites of passage. Through these practices, humans internalized the river's lessons, learning to perceive their actions within a larger continuum that extended beyond immediate need or survival. The river shaped both strategy and social dynamics. During conflicts, it provided natural barriers, ambush points, and escape routes. Control of crossings and fords became critical, and knowledge of hidden paths along its tributaries offered strategic advantage. Hunters and warriors developed skills in stealth and observation specifically to navigate the river's edge. Knowledge of tides, seasonal flooding, and shifting banks allowed tribes to plan movements with precision, turning natural rhythms into tactical tools. The river, impartial and constant, tested ingenuity and foresight, rewarding careful observation and punishing miscalculation. Observing the river's life cycles taught humans patience, adaptability, and timing. Fish spawned in certain seasons, reeds grew in predictable patterns, and birds and mammals followed migratory routes shaped by water. Hunters learned to wait, to move with subtlety, and to act in harmony with these rhythms. The river demanded that humans perceive not only immediate needs but also patterns that extended across weeks, months, and years. It instilled a deep awareness of temporality, causality, and consequence, encouraging reflection on both strategy and philosophy. The river also reinforced social cohesion. Shared fishing expeditions, crossings, and water-related rituals required cooperation, trust, and coordination. A single mistake, a misstep into deep currents, an overzealous pull on a net, or misjudgment of timing, could endanger the group. These experiences reinforced bonds, teaching patience, communication, and mutual responsibility. Beyond survival, the river became a locus of storytelling, cultural memory, and collective identity. Tales of legendary hunts, daring rescues, or the river's moods were recounted beside its banks, ensuring that wisdom, strategy, and philosophy were passed across generations. Its power also inspired awe and reflection. The river's ability to carve valleys, shift landscapes, and support life while remaining indifferent to human struggle taught humility. Tribes observed seasonal floods with both fear and reverence, recognizing that life could be sustained or threatened in an instant. Children learned to respect the force of water, while elders interpreted its patterns to teach lessons about resilience, adaptability, and foresight. Even in moments of quiet, the river's ceaseless movement reminded humans of time's inexorable flow, mortality, and the need to act wisely. The river acted as a mirror to human behavior. Tribes that acted recklessly or arrogantly often found their mistakes reflected in its currents, whether through lost tools, failed hunts, or misjudged crossings. Conversely, careful observation, cooperation, and patience were rewarded with abundant resources, safe passage, and strategic advantage. Through this dynamic, humans developed a philosophy that intertwined action, consequence, and ethics, seeing the river as both teacher and judge. Its constancy provided a backdrop against which human skill, courage, and wisdom were measured and tested. Finally, the river bound the valley's inhabitants into a shared consciousness. While rivalries and conflicts persisted, all tribes recognized the river's authority and centrality. Its waters flowed past settlements, forests, and sacred sites, linking disparate groups in a network of mutual dependence. By observing, learning, and respecting its rhythms, humans gained insight not only into the physical landscape but also into their own capacities for strategy, cooperation, and reflection. The river, in its ceaseless journey, taught that life in the valley was an intricate balance of observation, action, and understanding, an enduring lesson in survival, wisdom, and the interconnectedness of all things. Thus, the river was more than a geographical feature, it was a teacher, witness, and arbiter. Its currents carried stories, its banks offered guidance, and its rhythms shaped behavior, culture, and philosophy. In every ripple, in every seasonal shift, the valley's inhabitants discovered lessons that transcended immediate need. The river that knew all became a living archive of survival, strategy, and reflection, reminding humans that mastery of the land required not only skill and courage but also humility, observation, and an intimate awareness of the cycles that governed life itself. In the valley, history was never silent. Every stone, every riverbend, and every clearing carried whispers of those who had come before, hunters, gatherers, warriors, and elders whose lives had shaped the land and the people who lived upon it. The echoes of past generations were visible in worn paths, abandoned campsites, and remnants of tools and shelters left behind, telling stories of struggle, triumph, and loss. These traces served as both guidance and warning, teaching the living to navigate the delicate balance between survival, caution, and ambition. Every step through the valley was a dialogue with memory, a connection to the continuum of human experience that stretched across time. The valley's topography itself held stories. Hills bore the scars of battles long past, riverbanks marked the sites of long-forgotten feasts or negotiations, and forest clearings hinted at rituals performed in honor of the land and its spirits. Observant humans learned to read these signs, interpreting the subtle clues left by predecessors to understand the risks and opportunities of each location. Knowledge of the past became a tool for survival, allowing tribes to anticipate challenges, avoid pitfalls, and make strategic decisions informed by history. The land acted as both teacher and chronicler, encoding lessons in its contours, patterns, and rhythms. Artifacts scattered across the valley offered tangible links to those who had lived, hunted, and fought here. Flint tools, carved stones, and fragments of pottery spoke of innovation, skill, and daily life. Each object carried a story, revealing insights about technique, ingenuity, and cultural priorities. By studying these remnants, humans honed their own skills, adapted strategies, and preserved knowledge across generations. Even the smallest fragment, a sharpened flint, a broken arrowhead, or a scorched piece of pottery, was a testament to human resilience and creativity, a bridge connecting past to present. Echoes of the past were also preserved in memory and oral tradition. Elders recounted stories of legendary hunts, great battles, alliances formed and broken, and rituals performed at sacred sites. These narratives served as moral and strategic guides, teaching lessons about courage, cunning, patience, and respect. Myths and histories intertwined, offering both entertainment and instruction, embedding collective memory within the fabric of daily life. Young members of the tribe absorbed these stories through observation and participation, ensuring that knowledge, values, and experience were transmitted intact. The past, though invisible, became a living, guiding presence. The echoes also shaped strategy and leadership. Awareness of previous conflicts, successes, and failures informed decisions regarding alliances, hunting grounds, and territorial expansion. Leaders studied the patterns left by their predecessors, understanding which paths were safe, which ambush points had been used, and how rival tribes had responded to challenges. This historical intelligence was as crucial as observation of current conditions, allowing humans to anticipate threats, capitalize on opportunities, and navigate the complex interplay of power, resource management, and diplomacy. History was never theoretical, it was active, dynamic, and directly relevant to survival. Memory of the past also nurtured cultural continuity and identity. Rituals, songs, and ceremonies often referenced historical events, honoring ancestors and preserving their deeds. These acts reinforced social cohesion, instilling pride, respect, and shared purpose. Humans recognized that their actions were part of a longer chain, and that respect for the past ensured continuity for future generations. By remembering, retelling, and enacting the lessons of predecessors, the tribes transformed history into a living philosophy, guiding both behavior and thought. The valley became a repository of human experience, where past and present converged in meaningful, tangible ways. Even in moments of solitude, the echoes of the past were palpable. A lone hunter moving through a forest might feel the presence of footsteps from long ago, sense the patterns of movement left by ancestors, or recall stories of previous hunts along the same path. These experiences reinforced vigilance, caution, and respect for the environment, while simultaneously fostering a connection across generations. Awareness of historical precedent shaped both emotional and cognitive responses, encouraging mindfulness, reflection, and strategic thinking. Humans learned that survival was not only a matter of immediate action but also of situating oneself within a continuum of time, understanding patterns and consequences beyond the immediate horizon. The echoes of past victories and failures also carried philosophical weight. Humans recognized that life was cyclical, that triumph and loss, abundance and scarcity, courage and misjudgment were all intertwined. Observing the remnants of past struggles instilled humility, patience, and foresight. It became clear that human strength alone was insufficient, wisdom, observation, and adaptation were equally vital. By attending to these echoes, tribes internalized lessons about mortality, consequence, and interdependence, shaping both ethical and strategic behavior. The valley, with its deep memory, fostered reflection as much as action. Conflict left some of the most striking echoes. Battlefields, scarred earth, and broken implements marked sites of rivalry, teaching lessons about strategy, courage, and the cost of miscalculation. Survivors recounted these events with reverence and caution, embedding tactical knowledge in oral history. Young warriors absorbed these lessons, learning to anticipate danger, recognize advantage, and balance aggression with prudence. The echoes of conflict were thus both warning and guidance, shaping human behavior in profound and lasting ways. Ultimately, the echoes of the past were inseparable from daily life in the valley. They influenced hunting, strategy, social cohesion, leadership, and philosophy. Every artifact, path, story, and scarred landscape carried meaning, forming a living archive that guided human action and thought. By paying attention to these subtle signals, humans cultivated awareness, resilience, and wisdom, ensuring that survival was informed not only by immediate observation but also by the accumulated experience of generations. The valley itself acted as both teacher and historian, embedding lessons in its rivers, trees, stones, and winds. In this way, the past remained present, an invisible yet constant companion. Humans learned to walk with humility, act with foresight, and live in a delicate balance with the environment and one another. The echoes of those who came before were never distant, they resonated in every step, every decision, and every ritual. They formed a continuous thread linking generations, reminding humans that the valley was not merely a place to survive but a living canvas of memory, wisdom, and experience, where lessons of the past shaped the possibilities of the present and the promise of the future. As the sun dipped below the valley's ridges, casting long shadows across forests and plains, nightfall transformed the landscape into a world both familiar and alien. Darkness did not merely conceal, it amplified sound, movement, and risk. The forest, riverbanks, and open plains became a tapestry of silhouettes and whispers, each one carrying potential meaning. For the tribes, nightfall was a time of heightened awareness, demanding vigilance, strategy, and caution. Hunters, in particular, adapted to these changing conditions, developing techniques and routines that balanced survival, observation, and reflection. Night was not passive, it was active, alive, and instructive. The first act of nightfall involved preparation. Fires were lit at campsites, carefully controlled to provide warmth and light without drawing undue attention. Hunters organized themselves according to skill, experience, and duty, designating lookouts, patrols, and sentries. Each role carried responsibility, and every action required coordination and subtle communication. Signals were developed for alerting others to danger, a snapped twig, a specific whistle, or a shadow's movement, that allowed the group to respond swiftly and cohesively. Night demanded discipline, and adherence to these protocols often determined survival. The veil of darkness heightened sensory perception. With limited visibility, hunters relied on hearing, smell, and touch, training themselves to detect subtle changes in the environment. Rustling leaves, distant water movement, or the faint exhalation of a nocturnal animal became crucial indicators. The mind sharpened, focusing on patterns and irregularities that might signify threat or opportunity. Over time, humans developed a profound understanding of nocturnal rhythms, learning to anticipate predator movements, prey behavior, and the shifting landscape of rival tribes. Nightfall was both teacher and test, revealing strengths, weaknesses, and the limits of perception. Rival tribes and predators alike contributed to the tension of the night. Footsteps on soft soil, glimmers of reflected moonlight on hidden axes, or the distant howl of a predator demanded vigilance. Every sound was analyzed, every movement interpreted. Hunters recognized that threats were not solely physical, misjudgment, fear, or hesitation could lead to disaster. Thus, nightfall fostered psychological resilience as much as physical skill. Hunters cultivated patience, calm, and alertness, learning to balance instinct with observation, intuition with deliberation. Their actions were deliberate, precise, and informed by both immediate cues and historical knowledge passed down through the generations. Observation of the night extended beyond danger. Moonlight revealed patterns in the landscape, paths of animals, water reflections, and natural landmarks. Shadows offered concealment and advantage, allowing hunters to move silently or set traps for both prey and rivals. Nightfall became an extension of strategy, with humans leveraging darkness as a resource rather than merely enduring it. The interplay of light and shadow demanded creativity, adaptability, and foresight, reinforcing the valley's lessons about observation, intelligence, and the delicate balance between action and consequence. Rituals of the night carried symbolic and practical weight. Some were designed to honor ancestors, seek protection from unseen forces, or mark important events. Hunters might leave offerings at water sources, chant softly around fires, or perform gestures that reinforced respect for the land and its creatures. These acts were not mere superstition, they cultivated mindfulness, focus, and ethical awareness. Night rituals reinforced the connection between humans, the environment, and the continuum of life and death that framed existence in the valley. They embedded philosophy, morality, and communal identity into the very act of survival. The nocturnal hunt presented both challenge and opportunity. Certain prey were active only after dusk, while predators that threatened daytime activity rested in hidden lairs. Hunters used the cover of night to gain advantage, employing silent movements, traps, and coordinated ambushes. Success required careful planning, intimate knowledge of terrain, and the ability to interpret subtle signs in darkness. Every hunt reinforced the interplay of observation, patience, and action, teaching that mastery over the night was inseparable from understanding oneself, one's companions, and the valleys. Rhythms. Social cohesion was also tested and strengthened during the night. Close quarters at campsites, shared vigilance, and reliance on collective skill created bonds that were both practical and emotional. Trust became tangible, each member relied on others to remain alert, interpret signs, and respond effectively. The night exposed vulnerabilities, both personal and communal, and fostered reliance on cooperation, discipline, and shared responsibility. These experiences forged relationships that endured into daylight, reinforcing tribal unity, hierarchy, and collective identity. The river, forests, and plains all shifted under nightfall's influence. Currents appeared darker and more opaque, reflecting fragmented moonlight, trees cast deep, moving shadows that concealed both danger and opportunity, and open plains became mazes of silhouettes and sound. Hunters learned to integrate these changes into strategy, reading the altered landscape with the same precision applied during daylight. Adaptation, foresight, and attention to detail became the core tools of nocturnal survival, reinforcing lessons learned over generations about balance, awareness, and interconnectedness. Emotionally, nightfall was a crucible. Fear, anticipation, and awe mingled, sharpening cognition and heightening intuition. Hunters moved between caution and courage, reflecting on mortality, the weight of responsibility, and the intricate web of relationships that governed survival. Stories of nocturnal encounters, both real and embellished, were passed on as cautionary tales, embedding strategy, ethics, and philosophy into narrative. The night became a teacher not only of survival skills but also of reflection, resilience, and the profound understanding of one's place in the valley's vast, interconnected system. Ultimately, the nightfall and the hunter's vigil were inseparable from life in the valley. Darkness revealed the limits of perception, strengthened cooperation, and demanded the integration of physical skill, psychological resilience, and philosophical reflection. It taught that survival was not merely the result of immediate action but of continuous awareness, disciplined observation, and ethical engagement with the environment. The night transformed the valley into a theater of learning, strategy, and introspection, where every sound, shadow, and ripple became part of a dynamic curriculum guiding humans toward wisdom, adaptability, and endurance. Through vigilance, ritual, and observation, humans internalized the lessons of the night. They learned patience, foresight, and the importance of trust and cooperation. They discovered the subtle rhythms of prey and predator, the hidden currents of water and wind, and the silent signals of rival tribes. Nightfall became both a challenge and an opportunity, a realm where survival depended on skill, knowledge, and respect for the valley's cycles. In this way, the hunter's vigil under the cloak of darkness ensured continuity, resilience, and insight, transforming uncertainty into a crucible of learning, reflection, and mastery. As darkness enveloped the valley and the chill of night crept into the bones, tribes gathered around carefully tended fires. The flickering flames were more than a source of warmth and light, they were a nexus of memory, imagination, and community. Shadows danced across faces, illuminating expressions of awe, fear, curiosity, and wonder. In these moments, firelight became a bridge between the present and the past, the seen and the unseen, the living and the remembered. Around it, humans shared stories that entertained, educated, and reinforced the philosophical and practical lessons that had shaped survival for generations. Stories told around the fire were grounded in reality yet imbued with imagination. Elders recounted legendary hunts where strategy, skill, and courage had turned the tide of survival. Tales of rival tribes, cunning animals, and unpredictable landscapes conveyed lessons about observation, patience, and adaptation. These narratives were never static, each retelling evolved subtly, reflecting the storyteller's experiences and insights. In this way, stories became living entities, as dynamic and adaptive as the valley itself, shaping the perceptions, behavior, and cognition of those who listened. Firelight stories served as moral and ethical guides. They often highlighted themes of cooperation, respect, and consequence. A tale of a hunter who acted recklessly and endangered the tribe was told alongside a story of another who displayed patience and foresight, reinforcing principles embedded in the hunter's code. Young members absorbed these lessons, internalizing them through narrative rather than instruction alone. The emotional resonance of story, fear, triumph, wonder, ensured that lessons were remembered deeply, shaping behavior in subtle but profound ways. The sensory environment around the fire enhanced storytelling. The crackle of wood, the scent of smoke, and the warmth of flames created a multi-layered experience that heightened attention and memory. Shadows cast by flickering light transformed simple gestures into dramatic expressions, while the undulating glow suggested movement, life, and possibility. Storytelling became an immersive performance, blending narrative, gesture, sound, and communal presence. The environment itself reinforced the power of narrative, creating a space where humans could reflect, learn, and connect across generations. Stories also encoded survival knowledge. Tales of dangerous terrain, elusive prey, and rival tribes contained practical advice disguised within narrative form. Directions, hunting techniques, and strategies for avoiding hazards were passed on through metaphor, allegory, and anecdote. This method ensured that essential information could be retained and transmitted even in the absence of written language. The firelight thus became a classroom, a theater, and a library, preserving collective memory while nurturing imagination, critical thinking, and problem-solving. The communal nature of storytelling reinforced social bonds. Around the fire, young and old, hunters and gatherers, men and women participated in a shared ritual of attention and engagement. Laughter, gasps, and thoughtful silence echoed across the group, creating a rhythm that reinforced cohesion and identity. Stories reminded the tribe of shared history, collective challenges, and mutual dependence. Through this ritual, humans internalized the importance of cooperation, respect for one another, and recognition of each individual's role in the ongoing narrative of survival. Firelight also illuminated philosophical reflections. Tales often explored themes of mortality, courage, cunning, and the interconnectedness of life. By witnessing the consequences of past actions, successes and failures alike, listeners gained insight into ethics, strategy, and human nature. The fire's glow encouraged contemplation, turning narrative into meditation. In this way, storytelling nurtured not only practical skill but also reflective thought, fostering a mindset attuned to observation, learning, and long-term consequences. Imagination played a critical role. The firelight's shifting shadows allowed listeners to visualize animals, rival hunters, and dramatic landscapes, engaging cognitive faculties essential for strategy, planning, and empathy. Mental simulation of past events or hypothetical scenarios enabled humans to anticipate outcomes, practice decision-making, and refine tactical reasoning. In essence, stories transformed abstract knowledge into vivid, actionable insight, bridging memory, imagination, and applied understanding. The rhythm of firelight stories varied to match content and audience. Some tales were slow and meditative, allowing listeners to absorb nuances of strategy, environment, and emotion. Others were fast, intense, and suspenseful, mirroring the unpredictability of hunts, battles, or natural challenges. This variation reinforced attention, deepened engagement, and mirrored the natural rhythms of the valley itself, cycles of calm, tension, action, and reflection. Storytelling thus became a rehearsal for life, simulating challenges and responses in a safe yet emotionally resonant environment. Ultimately, firelight stories were central to the valley's culture and survival. They preserved knowledge, encoded ethics, nurtured imagination, and reinforced communal bonds. Around the glow of fire, humans connected with their ancestors, learned from their experiences, and contemplated their own actions and potential. The flames illuminated not only faces but also minds, inspiring reflection, strategy, and creativity. Through narrative, memory, and imagination, the valley's inhabitants cultivated wisdom, resilience, and cohesion, ensuring that the lessons of the past, the challenges of the present, and the possibilities of the future were interwoven into the fabric of daily life. In this way, the firelight became a mirror for the human condition, illuminating, dynamic, and deeply instructive. The stories it revealed were not mere entertainment but essential threads in the tapestry of survival, identity, and philosophy. By listening, observing, and reflecting, humans transformed narrative into insight, emotion into action, and memory into preparation. Firelight stories, ephemeral yet enduring, ensured that the valley's lessons endured, guiding thought, behavior, and community across generations, from the quiet flicker of evening to the enduring flow of history itself. Beneath the apparent stillness of the valley, a tension lingered that was felt more than seen, a silent conflict that shaped every movement, every decision, and every heartbeat. Rival tribes did not always clash openly, yet their presence, intentions, and strategies were communicated through subtle signs: a disturbed patch of soil, a partially hidden footprint, the sudden flight of birds, or the distant echo of a tool striking stone. This silent conflict required constant vigilance, deep understanding of human behavior, and an intuitive grasp of strategy. Survival depended on perceiving not only the visible but also the unseen currents of rivalry, alliance, and opportunity that ran through the valley. The silent conflict was as much psychological as it was physical. Tribes studied one another with careful observation, interpreting signals, gestures, and patterns of activity. Campsites were chosen not only for resource availability but also for defensibility and concealment. Hunters learned to move stealthily, leaving minimal trace, while simultaneously gathering intelligence on potential competitors. Even simple acts, such as the selection of a fishing spot or the path taken through a forest, were calculated with awareness of rivals. Every step became a negotiation between action, caution, and anticipation, requiring both tactical skill and philosophical patience. Observation extended to understanding patterns over time. Tribes noted the movements of rivals across seasons, their hunting techniques, and the locations of hidden caches. This knowledge became an invisible map of influence, opportunity, and threat. Elder hunters taught younger members to read subtle cues: broken twigs indicating passage, temporary shelters suggesting strategy, or even the arrangement of firewood revealing the number and alertness of occupants. The silent conflict was a continuous dialogue, where knowledge of the unseen determined advantage, and awareness of consequence governed every decision. The valley itself played a central role in this dynamic. Rivers, cliffs, forests, and plains were both barriers and opportunities. Natural features provided cover, escape routes, or ambush points, allowing tribes to leverage the environment in their strategies. By understanding the rhythms and constraints of the landscape, humans converted uncertainty into tactical knowledge. Silent conflict was therefore intertwined with environmental mastery, the ability to interpret the land's subtleties, anticipate change, and integrate this awareness into action. The valley became a partner in both competition and survival. Communication within tribes was refined to support the silent conflict. Gestures, subtle signals, and coded sounds allowed coordination without alerting rivals. Knowledge of terrain, wind direction, and the behavior of animals was shared and rehearsed. Each member understood the balance between caution and initiative, discretion and action. Leaders guided decisions not only through command but also by cultivating an intuitive sense of timing and risk among their people. The silent conflict required intelligence, self-discipline, and ethical consideration. Every action had potential consequence, not only for survival but for the social and moral fabric of the tribe. The stakes of silent conflict were existential. Access to hunting grounds, water sources, and shelter depended on careful negotiation of unseen rivalries. Mistimed movements or misjudged intentions could lead to confrontation, starvation, or displacement. Humans quickly learned to respect the invisible dynamics of power, influence, and knowledge. The silent conflict demanded constant adaptation, alertness, and mindfulness, transforming every routine activity, from collecting firewood to tracking prey, into an exercise in strategy and foresight. Psychological tension was a constant companion. Hunters and gatherers moved through the valley aware of being watched, evaluated, and interpreted. Sleep was lighter, senses more acute, and decision-making sharper. The quiet presence of rivals created a heightened awareness that sharpened perception, encouraged strategic thought, and fostered subtle forms of creativity. The silent conflict was therefore not only a test of skill but a crucible for cognitive, emotional, and ethical development, shaping humans into adaptive, perceptive, and resilient beings. Ritual and reflection were essential responses to this tension. By performing ceremonies, recounting stories, and observing rites of passage, tribes reinforced memory, strategy, and moral guidance. Elders embedded lessons about prudence, patience, and foresight into narratives, teaching young members to navigate both visible and invisible challenges. Reflection allowed humans to process uncertainty, fear, and anticipation, transforming stress into insight. The silent conflict, therefore, was not merely external, it was internalized, shaping thought, judgment, and emotional regulation. Even in apparent moments of calm, the valley echoed with silent rivalry. Paths were chosen with caution, hunting grounds were surveyed, and water sources approached with observation and discretion. Communication within and between tribes was coded, subtle, and continuous. These practices cultivated awareness of nuance, patience, and indirect influence, showing that control did not always require direct confrontation. Mastery of the silent conflict was an ongoing exercise in strategy, perception, and ethics, teaching that power often lay in subtlety, knowledge, and timing rather than force alone. Ultimately, the silent conflict defined the rhythm of life in the valley. It shaped hunting, leadership, settlement, and ritual. It fostered vigilance, ingenuity, and cooperation, reinforcing bonds within tribes while simultaneously sharpening perception of rivals. The valley's inhabitants learned to navigate uncertainty with skill, patience, and ethical awareness, recognizing that survival was inseparable from understanding both the visible and invisible forces that governed their world. The silent conflict was not merely a condition of existence, it was a teacher, shaping thought, behavior, and social cohesion with enduring impact. Through vigilance, observation, and reflection, humans internalized the lessons of rivalry, timing, and consequence. Every step, every glance, and every movement became part of a dynamic negotiation with unseen competitors. The silent conflict was a crucible for wisdom, adaptability, and foresight, transforming the valley into a living classroom where humans honed strategy, ethics, and resilience. In this way, the invisible struggle shaped the culture, cognition, and philosophy of survival, ensuring that each individual and each tribe could navigate the delicate interplay of life, risk, and opportunity. The valley, patient and impartial, waited. Seasons changed, rivers swelled and receded, and forests thickened and thinned, yet beneath this rhythm lay an inevitable reckoning. Time and circumstance converged to test every tribe, hunter, and family. Survival was no longer merely about individual skill, observation, or stealth, it was about adaptation to relentless change, understanding consequence, and facing the culmination of long, intertwined struggles. The valley demanded balance, judgment, and insight, it measured the cost of ambition, hubris, and neglect with quiet, unyielding precision. The reckoning was multifaceted. Environmental pressures, the rise and fall of river levels, shifting food availability, and the unpredictable movements of game, imposed constraints that required planning, foresight, and cooperation. Tribes that ignored these subtle signals faced hardship. Seasonal floods could wash away temporary shelters, storms could collapse the fragile security of a campsite, and drought could drive predators and rivals closer to vulnerable settlements. Each challenge was a test of intelligence, patience, and strategic thinking, forcing humans to confront the consequences of miscalculation and to learn from both success and failure. Beyond environmental challenges, the valley exposed social and ethical vulnerabilities. Tensions within tribes surfaced as resources became scarce or uncertainty increased. Disputes over leadership, hunting privileges, and priorities tested social cohesion. The valley, impartial observer, amplified the results of human decisions. Unity and cooperation produced stability, while discord and recklessness magnified risk. In this way, the valley itself acted as a force of moral and practical reckoning, holding each individual and tribe accountable to the principles of survival, ethics, and foresight. The reckoning was also historical and cumulative. Generations of hunters, gatherers, and leaders had left their imprint on the valley, shaping patterns of settlement, movement, and conflict. Knowledge passed down through observation, story, and ritual informed responses to immediate crises. Yet, the valley's impartiality reminded humans that legacy alone could not guarantee survival. Adaptation to present circumstances, attention to nuance, and strategic anticipation of rivals' behavior were essential. The valley rewarded intelligence, experience, and humility, and punished arrogance, neglect, and overconfidence with unflinching clarity. Rival tribes played a crucial role in the valley's reckoning. Subtle and overt conflicts, negotiations, and alliances created a web of interdependence and tension. The outcomes of these interactions, whether successful hunts, territorial gains, or strategic retreats, were measured not in immediate glory but in cumulative consequence. Tribes that misread rivals' intentions, underestimated capability, or ignored subtle signals faced compounding setbacks. The valley's reckoning thus operated as a multi-layered feedback system, integrating environment, history, and social dynamics to test decision-making and resilience. Observation remained central. Those who survived the valley's reckoning did so by interpreting subtle signals in the environment and human behavior. Birds' flight, river currents, animal tracks, and weather patterns were all data points in a complex system of survival. Similarly, gestures, camp arrangements, and patterns of rival movement provided insight into intention and capability. The valley rewarded attentiveness, patience, and analytical reasoning, teaching humans that survival was inseparable from awareness, strategy, and ethical judgment. The psychological dimension of the reckoning was profound. Anxiety, anticipation, and reflection were constant companions. Hunters and leaders faced uncertainty, moral ambiguity, and the consequences of choices that could affect many lives. Vigilance, discipline, and emotional regulation became as essential as physical skill. Humans were compelled to confront mortality, ethical responsibility, and the ripple effects of decisions. The valley's reckoning shaped not only action but also consciousness, cultivating reflection, resilience, and philosophical insight as much as tactical mastery. Ritual and reflection were integral responses. Ceremonies, offerings, and storytelling reinforced lessons about consequence, strategy, and ethics. Elders used narrative to embed understanding of past successes and failures, creating a cognitive and cultural framework for navigating the valley's challenges. Firelight illuminated faces and minds alike, turning reflection into shared insight. Through ritual, humans internalized the valley's impartial judgments, transforming environmental and social pressures into lessons, guidance, and ethical calibration. The culmination of the valley's reckoning often coincided with decisive events, critical hunts, confrontations with rival tribes, or environmental extremes. These moments demanded full integration of skill, knowledge, observation, and judgment. Success was never guaranteed, it depended on careful planning, disciplined execution, and ethical decision-making aligned with the valley's rhythms. Failure could be instructive, creating opportunities for reflection, adaptation, and intergenerational learning. The valley's reckoning was both immediate and longitudinal, influencing daily survival and shaping the trajectory of future generations. The valley's impartiality also inspired awe. Tribes learned to respect its power, cycles, and authority, understanding that no human effort, regardless of bravery or cunning, could subvert its laws. Mountains, rivers, forests, and plains acted as silent adjudicators, testing adaptability, insight, and humility. Humans observed, interpreted, and responded, developing strategies that were attuned not only to rivals but also to the valley itself. This recognition nurtured a philosophy of survival grounded in observation, reflection, and ethical engagement with the land and its rhythms. In practical terms, the valley's reckoning created a synthesis of all prior learning, skill, experience, observation, social cohesion, and ethical understanding were simultaneously tested. Hunters needed precision, foresight, and coordination, leaders required judgment, diplomacy, and ethical insight, tribes had to balance ambition with caution, competition with cooperation. The valley demanded an integrated approach, where each action and decision was weighed for consequence, alignment with ethical principles, and capacity to sustain life and community. Survival was holistic, requiring mastery of both tangible and intangible domains. Ultimately, the valley's reckoning was both conclusion and preparation. It measured the outcomes of past decisions while shaping strategies, skills, and ethical frameworks for the future. Tribes emerged strengthened, humbled, and wiser, or weakened, fragmented, and vulnerable. The lessons endured, embedded in memory, story, ritual, and environment. The valley's reckoning was never final, it was continuous, an impartial force guiding humans toward observation, adaptation, reflection, and ethical engagement with life's complexity. The valley demanded nothing less than full awareness, resilience, and alignment with its rhythms. Its reckoning integrated every facet of existence: environmental mastery, strategic skill, social cohesion, psychological discipline, ethical judgment, and philosophical reflection. It was an enduring test, shaping culture, consciousness, and survival. Through its impartial assessment, the valley ensured that only those who could balance ambition with prudence, action with reflection, and skill with wisdom could thrive. In this way, the valley's reckoning became both teacher and arbiter, shaping not only who survived but how humans understood themselves, their relationships, and their place in the continuum of life. After the turbulence of seasons, battles, and relentless struggle, the valley sometimes fell into a profound stillness, a silence that was both restorative and revealing. It was a moment when the weight of survival, conflict, and history lifted temporarily, allowing humans to observe, reflect, and assimilate lessons from the trials they had endured. The air was heavy with calm, carrying the sense of damp earth, flowering plants, and smoke from distant fires. Even the river seemed to flow more deliberately, mirroring the pause in human activity and the valley's own contemplative rhythm. This silence was not emptiness, it was charged with meaning, memory, and potential. In the aftermath of storms, whether literal or metaphorical, the valley revealed traces of struggle and resilience. Flattened campsites, scarred trees, shifted riverbanks, and scattered animal tracks were both records and teachers. Humans examined these remnants with care, reconstructing the events that had occurred, learning from mistakes, and planning for the future. The silence allowed thought to emerge fully, unhurried by the immediacy of danger. It became a space for reflection, where lessons from the past could be internalized and integrated into the strategies of tomorrow. The valley's quietude also provided a stage for emotional processing. Relief, grief, awe, and gratitude surfaced in the minds and hearts of its inhabitants. Survivors contemplated the fragility of life and the resilience that had carried them through challenges. Elders and storytellers recounted events around fires or shaded clearings, weaving observation, history, and emotion into narratives that reinforced communal memory. Young members listened intently, absorbing lessons in strategy, ethics, and human nature. The silence was thus both personal and collective, offering a canvas for emotional, intellectual, and philosophical reflection. Nature itself seemed to participate in this moment of calm. Birds resumed cautious calls, insects hummed in the warming air, and new shoots of plants emerged from fertile soil. Even predators moved with restraint, respecting the valley's rhythms and the relative stillness of prey. Humans observed these subtle shifts, interpreting them as signs of recovery, opportunity, and continuity. The quiet revealed interconnections between species, environment, and human activity, reinforcing the understanding that survival depended on awareness, patience, and respect for the intricate web of life. The silence after the storm also highlighted human adaptability and ingenuity. Innovations in toolmaking, shelter construction, and hunting techniques became evident in the rearranged landscape. Caches of stored food, repaired traps, and reoriented pathways demonstrated foresight and careful planning. These subtle adaptations were testimonies to the capacity for learning and evolution in response to adversity. Observing and understanding these human modifications allowed tribes to refine strategies, enhance cooperation, and cultivate resilience for the challenges yet to come. Reflection in the valley's quiet led to philosophical insight. Humans contemplated mortality, consequence, and the cycles of existence that defined life in the valley. They recognized that survival was not simply about immediate skill or luck but about understanding patterns, balancing action with observation, and harmonizing ambition with caution. The valley, impartial and patient, offered no judgment but allowed space for contemplation, teaching that insight often emerged most clearly in moments of stillness, after struggle had subsided. Social cohesion was reinforced during this quiet. Shared experiences of survival, loss, and triumph became points of connection and empathy. Tribe members communicated more deeply, exchanging stories, advice, and emotional support. Respect for leadership, recognition of skill, and acknowledgement of courage strengthened bonds. In this way, the silence functioned as a mechanism for rebuilding trust and unity, reminding humans that collective resilience was essential for enduring the valley's ongoing cycles of challenge and change. Even the river, once tumultuous or heavily traversed, now reflected serenity. Its mirrored surface offered clarity, symbolically connecting humans with reflection and foresight. Observing the river in calm provided opportunities to plan movements, hunting strategies, and resource management. Subtle lessons about timing, patience, and attention to detail became evident in the slow ripple of water over stones. The river, a constant witness to human endeavor, served as both mirror and mentor in the valley's post-storm tranquility. The silence encouraged mindfulness and heightened awareness. Every rustle, bird call, and breeze became significant, sharpening perception and sensitivity. Humans learned to interpret these cues with precision, applying knowledge accumulated through generations to predict changes, anticipate opportunities, and avoid potential threats. The valley's stillness was thus an active teacher, emphasizing observation, reflection, and measured action. Survival and wisdom were cultivated in these pauses, demonstrating that endurance relied as much on contemplation as on skill or strength. Finally, the silence after the storm was an invitation to continuity and hope. It reminded humans that, despite conflict, loss, and adversity, life persisted. New growth, fresh opportunities, and renewed strength emerged from the valley's rhythms. By integrating lessons from struggle with reflection in calm, humans honed strategy, resilience, and philosophical insight. The silence was both conclusion and beginning, a bridge between what had occurred and what was yet to come. In its quiet, the valley offered not only respite but perspective, embedding the understanding that life's challenges, while formidable, were part of a larger, interconnected system of learning, adaptation, and survival. Through the valley's stillness, humans recognized the cumulative impact of their actions, decisions, and relationships. Reflection transformed experience into wisdom, struggle into strategy, and observation into ethical insight. The silence was not empty, it was charged with the presence of memory, the lessons of predecessors, and the anticipation of future challenges. In this way, the valley's post-storm quiet became a crucible for learning, growth, and philosophical reflection, ensuring that every human who walked its landscape carried forward knowledge, resilience, and awareness. In the final reckoning of the day, the silence after the storm served as a reminder that survival was inseparable from reflection, observation, and ethical engagement. Humans learned to harmonize action with contemplation, skill with insight, and ambition with patience. The valley, impartial and eternal, offered the ultimate lesson, that in the interplay of struggle and calm, conflict and resolution, humans found not only survival but understanding, connection, and the enduring rhythm of life itself. As dawn broke over the valley, a quiet reverence lingered among the remnants of generations who had walked, fought, and survived here. The valley was no longer just a landscape, it was a repository of experience, encoded in stone, soil, and story. Rock carvings, worn paths, ancient shelters, and scattered tools bore silent witness to countless lives and decisions, victories and defeats. Each fragment told a story, of ingenuity, perseverance, misjudgment, and reflection, and demanded recognition. Humans understood that the past was never truly gone, it persisted in the traces left behind, offering lessons to those perceptive enough to read them. Artifacts were the most tangible form of this legacy. Flint tools, arrowheads, and pottery shards revealed the sophistication and adaptability of earlier inhabitants. The edges of these tools, honed to precision, spoke of survival instincts sharpened over generations, of countless hours devoted to perfecting technique. Pottery hinted at domestic life, the storage of food, and the rhythms of ritual. Even fragments of broken implements told stories of trials and errors, reminding the living that skill was not innate but cultivated through persistence, observation, and adaptation. By studying these remnants, humans learned to replicate, innovate, and refine their own tools, embedding ancestral wisdom into the present. Stone structures, though weathered and crumbling, served as markers of habitation, strategy, and communal effort. Temporary shelters, defensive embankments, and sacred enclosures illustrated the balance between utility and ritual, practicality and symbolism. Their construction required collaboration, foresight, and knowledge of materials, environment, and seasonal patterns. Observing the remains of these structures, humans gleaned insights into planning, leadership, and collective action. The valley became a classroom, teaching that human ingenuity was inseparable from cooperation and ethical engagement with both the land and one another. The valley's topography itself preserved stories. Hills, riverbanks, and forest clearings bore marks of human activity, battle scars, worn trails, and areas cleared for hunting or ritual. These subtle cues conveyed lessons in observation, strategy, and environmental adaptation. Humans learned to read them, interpreting patterns to anticipate opportunities or hazards. Every ridge and depression was a repository of memory, demonstrating that the landscape itself could teach as effectively as any artifact or story. The valley's enduring features ensured that wisdom persisted beyond individual lives, becoming part of a collective consciousness that guided decision-making and survival. Oral tradition amplified the power of these legacies. Stories passed from elder to youth intertwined practical instruction, ethical guidance, and philosophical reflection. Tales recounted daring hunts, strategic retreats, alliances forged and broken, and lessons drawn from misfortune. The narrative framework allowed complex information to be remembered, internalized, and transmitted with emotional resonance. Young listeners absorbed not only facts but patterns of thought, principles of action, and philosophical perspectives on life, mortality, and the natural world. Memory, story, and reflection converged to create a living archive, perpetually renewing human understanding across generations. Even the intangible elements of legacy, rituals, songs, and gestures, held profound significance. Ceremonies performed in honor of ancestors reinforced continuity, respect, and ethical guidance. Songs encoded histories of tribes, marking events that would otherwise fade with time. Gestures and body language, practiced and observed, communicated social norms and survival strategies. These nonverbal traditions were as critical as tools or structures, embedding knowledge in culture and daily practice. Humans learned that legacy was not only physical but relational, ethical, and cognitive, holistic inheritance of survival, thought, and identity. The lessons embedded in the valley carried philosophical weight. Humans reflected on the cycles of life, the consequences of decisions, and the interdependence of action and environment. They understood that survival demanded integration of observation, strategy, ethics, and cooperation. Every artifact, path, and story served as a meditation on mortality, resilience, and continuity. These lessons transcended immediate utility, shaping thought, behavior, and worldview. The valley was a silent philosopher, teaching that life was interconnected, contingent, and infinitely instructive for those who paid attention. Legacy also fostered anticipation of the future. By examining patterns left by predecessors, humans predicted environmental changes, prey movements, and potential threats from rival tribes. Observation of stone structures, tool placement, and abandoned paths informed decision-making, reinforcing foresight and strategic planning. The valley's accumulated memory became both compass and guide, demonstrating that human survival relied on the integration of past wisdom, present awareness, and future anticipation. Lessons were encoded not only in memory but in action, creating continuity between generations. Social cohesion and identity were strengthened by this legacy. Shared reverence for artifacts, stories, and sacred spaces cultivated empathy, respect, and a sense of purpose. Tribal members recognized themselves as part of a continuum, connected to those who had come before and those who would follow. Leadership, cooperation, and collective effort were reinforced by awareness of ancestral example, creating a culture in which survival was inseparable from shared ethical understanding and communal responsibility. Humans internalized the principle that continuity depended on both action and reflection. The valley's legacies were also a source of humility. The endurance of natural features, the remnants of skillful predecessors, and the ephemeral traces of victory and loss reminded humans that their own lives were part of a larger system. Individual achievement was meaningful but always situated within environmental, social, and temporal contexts. Recognition of this continuity fostered patience, foresight, and ethical consideration. Legacy, in this sense, was both inspiration and caution, teaching humans to act with awareness, respect, and thoughtfulness. In the quiet moments of observation, humans found inspiration and guidance in these legacies. The placement of a stone, the arrangement of tools, or the echoes of a story could inform decisions about hunting, settlement, or social interaction. Memory and materiality converged, creating a dynamic archive in which the living interacted with the dead, past challenges informed present strategies, and philosophical reflection shaped ethical action. The valley became a teacher, historian, and mentor, offering insight, guidance, and continuity to every perceptive observer. Ultimately, legacies in stone and memory ensured that the valley was more than a place of survival. It was a repository of knowledge, wisdom, and ethical guidance. Each human who walked its paths, studied its artifacts, or listened to its stories participated in a continuum, connecting past, present, and future. By honoring these legacies, humans preserved insight, reinforced community, and cultivated the skills and mindset necessary for enduring life's challenges. The valley taught that survival, memory, and philosophy were inseparable, and that the lessons of the past were always available to those willing to observe, reflect, and learn. Through careful observation, storytelling, ritual, and reflection, the valley's inhabitants transformed memory into action, history into philosophy, and traces into guidance. The stones, paths, and stories were never silent. They spoke of resilience, ingenuity, ethical responsibility, and the profound continuity of life. Humans internalized these lessons, ensuring that legacy was not static but lived, applied, and extended through each decision, each hunt, and each interaction. In this way, the valley remained eternal, a teacher and custodian of wisdom, offering insight to all who walked its landscape and reminding them that every life contributed to the ongoing story of survival and understanding.